Fahmi has been an associate since 2002, nearly 20 years now, and he was a program coordinator on capital mobility at the Asia Monitor Resource Center in Hong Kong, where he coordinated the Asia Transnational Corporations Monitoring Network. He has written many publications which focus on the gig economy, and a very good one recently which I've read and which I will recommend all of you to read as well. I think our friends at REFSA will be able to provide you a copy of that work. Moving on, the third speaker, Tan Zaigen. He is now the research manager at the Asia School of Business, and Zaigen was formerly an associate at Khazanah Research Institute when he was working on understanding the informal sector and also a bit on food security. After our three speakers go, we will then have a commentary by Professor Boy Lutie, who is the director of the Technology and Industry Research Center at the Institute of Public Policy at the South China University of Technology in Guangzhou. After our discussion, we will then open the floor for questions. I see that we have about a strong 60 member participant right now, so I hope you all tune in till the end where you can have a more two-way conversation and respond and even ask our speakers on some things which you want more details to. Without taking up more time, Nur Hisham, I pass the mic to you.
Okay, thank you, JJ. First of all, thank you to REFSA and FES for inviting me. I think this is a timely discussion on the gig economy, given what we've been through over the last few months. It's something that EPF has been looking at for quite some time. And obviously, we're quite concerned about how we can extend social protection to workers in this area. But let me first start by really putting some of this in historical context. When we talk about informal work or formal work, actually, what we think of as the typical job, you go into the office, you sit down and 9 to 5. The reality is that that has always been a minority of jobs, and it has only been a feature of the employment landscape since the 19th century. Previous to that, jobs were much more informal. There was a lot more, I think the multi-employer type of model has been much more prevalent. So in some ways, what we're seeing today is actually a return to pre-industrial forms of organization and employment structures. So this, what we've gone through over the last couple of hundred years in terms of what we think of as jobs has really been kind of a blip in human history. And I think in some ways, a lot of our systems as well as, I think, support has really been geared towards something that's really, I think, temporary in terms of its historical significance. Obviously, it's quite important to us today because these kinds of historical processes take time. But again, I think this is nothing new, to be honest. But it is a problem that and a challenge that we need to face. And obviously, we'll have to come up with something new to actually address it. Also, I think when we talk about the gig economy, I mean, the prototypical way we think of it is usually the ride sharing or even somebody working on contracts or whatever. But it's really a larger continuum between formal, within the informal sector itself. So you can have jobs or employment in the informal sector or in the gig economy that looks very close to what a normal job would look like, all the way down to serious part-timers. It could be somebody who's just doing ride sharing over the weekend versus somebody who does it full-time. So it's really hard to design systems around such a massive difference in terms of what employment actually is. And I think that's the biggest challenge I think a lot of governments are facing today. But why is this happening? Why are we reverting to more informality? And I think there's a few things that have been going on. I think it's been referenced, especially under the corporate side. We are dealing with a much more complex world, and it's also a much more volatile world. So from a risk perspective, a lot of, especially larger companies, their having to adjust their employment patterns to cater for that. And I think partly also because the pace of innovation has been increasing, the pace of obsolescence of skills has also been increasing. So from a talent acquisition or retention perspective, one is that it's getting more expensive to actually recruit somebody. So the risk of mistakes is actually higher. And second, I think that there's a recognition that the kind of skills you need could be temporary. I mean, there's a lot of IT projects out there that run for 3 to 6 months, and you just don't need those people on board anymore. So there's been a gradual shift towards temporary forms of employment, contract work and the like. It's perfectly rational given the environment, but it has given rise to increasing informality, increasing, I think, temporariness of employment. So there has been, I think, this gradual pace of increasing informality, increasing of temporary employment contracts and the like, simply because the environment dictates that these things happen. So obviously, the other thing that we've been seeing, especially over the last couple of decades or so, has been increasing automation and digitalization. As a matter of fact, I think of, when we think of people like Grab or other platforms like that, my view has been that, it's primarily just digitalization of informal work. So there's little difference between, what was available 40, 50 years ago versus what we have today. It's just that the form has changed a little bit, or the form of delivery has changed. So there has been that shift towards more temporary employment. There has been that shift towards more automation. There has been a kind of hollowing out of what we used to term middle-class jobs. So there's been increasing inequality between the higher skilled versus lower skilled workers. There's been less need for, the kind of steady or manufacturing type jobs or even office type jobs. And there's been increasing evolution of the type of jobs that are actually required within a corporation. I know when I first entered the workforce, we had clerk typists and the like. Now a lot of things are actually being done either automatically or by executives themselves. So, with the tools that are available today, we just don't need that much labor as we used to. And of course, with higher labor costs, then there is that tendency towards reducing that element of, I think, employment. One, I think, consequence of this obviously is that there's been also a gradual shift from employer-based training to employee responsibility for their own training. And we can see that in the numbers. We can see that in the reluctance of a lot of companies to actually fund worker training or retraining. Again, that's partly because cost of labor has actually been rising. So in a way, it's an uncomfortable situation where workers become more responsible for their own reskilling, while their employment status has become a lot more volatile and vulnerable. Again, I think part two, in terms of why this is happening, one thing that's been very clear over the last 2 or 3 decades, of course, is there's been this global movement towards providing for tertiary education. And one problem that I think a lot of economies are facing is that the pace of job creation for high-skilled jobs that are appropriate for graduates has actually been relatively stable. On average, I think, the US or Europe or in more advanced economies like Korea, what have you, only about 25% of jobs are actually appropriate for graduates. Yet, if you look at these countries, South Korea has something like a 70% enrollment rate in tertiary education. The US is something like 60+%. The UK is about 50+%. So even in Malaysia, we have something like a 40% post-secondary enrollment in tertiary education. But unfortunately, again, even in an industrial economy, even in a knowledge-based economy, we're only producing about 25% of new jobs in high-skilled work. So there's this big mismatch between what's available on the market versus what's being offered by job seekers. And that's going to be And I think that's partly one of the reasons why informality is actually rising. You're overqualified for the work you do, so you tend to, start your own business or find other ways of justifying that investment in education. So, and again, I think because I was watching the video before this webinar started, and there was so much emphasis on jobs. I think that's something that we're going to have to revisit going forward, because the reality is that the economy is not going to create jobs. It might create opportunities, but jobs are going to be much, much harder to come by. And that's one of the things that are actually driving more informal work. So we're seeing this not just in Malaysia, we're seeing this on a global basis. There is an increasing trend towards informality, and gig work is one manifestation of that. From a policy perspective, obviously, there's a lot of catching up to do. I think in more advanced economies, generally speaking, they have greater public provision of social protection, where the government takes on more of the load. In a certain sense, that makes it a bit simpler. On the other hand, it's also probably not sustainable, because the kind of, again, going back to the cost of living, going back to increasing lifespans, and people are basically living longer. Their retirement ages are not keeping track. So that provision of retirement income is becoming harder and harder on a public basis. Also, I think one of the issues facing a lot of countries is that, as in Malaysia, a lot of social protection is actually built around the formal job landscape. So you have your mandatory contributions from your wages or salaries. But in Malaysia, for example, I think looking at the EPF numbers specifically, we've been seeing a steady drop, especially over the last decade and a half or so, in the number of regular salaried workers. The reality is that it has never been a majority in the Malaysian labor market. I think we peaked out just before the COVID crisis. We peaked out at about 5.3 million regular salaried workers. We have 7+ million in terms of active contributors, but a lot of that, roughly about 2 million or so, is actually more like part-time or temporary work where there are contributions. But if you're talking about somebody who's actually going to an office, getting a salary, and then they're having the deduction every month, we're just talking about 5.3 million. And it has dropped to something like 4.7 million as of today. So that's out of a workforce of about 15.6, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe just 1/3 of the private sector is actually holding down a steady job. So that portion of the labor force obviously enjoys social protection in the form of EPF, also in the form of SOCSO. But that leaves out roughly about almost 10 million people. About 1.5 million are under the government, so they're covered under the government pension scheme. But that still leaves about 8.5 million. You take away the self-employed, and you come to figure about 6 to 7 million. So we have a very, very large portion of our labor force that's not covered by any kind of formal protection scheme. Now, what other countries have done with this is that there are a number of approaches to do this. One, you can try to make it mandatory. In other words, regardless of where your income comes from, you have to contribute to a retirement fund or a social insurance scheme. I think that's the approach that Singapore has taken. I think Korea has done the same thing. I think a lot of Europeans do that as well. But the problem there, I think even under such systems, there's still gaps. If I'm not mistaken, the coverage in Singapore is roughly about 85%. So they're still leaving out about 15% of the workforce. Same thing in Korea, and I think in Europe as well. There is a lot of interest in redesigning social protection systems around informal work. But I haven't found anybody to come up with a perfect solution yet. It's an imperfect world, unfortunately. So there are various experiments going on around the world that are actually trying to design social protection schemes around informal work. So a couple of problems with doing that. One is, what is the legal definition of employment? And to allude to the example I gave earlier, you know, if you're a full-time Grab driver, then obviously you look like an employee. But if you're only doing it on weekends, or if you're only doing it 2-3 hours a week, then you're not. And you know, to write laws around that kind of continuum where there's such big differences in employment circumstances is going to be extremely difficult. Second thing is categorization. I mean, if you're doing it full-time, that's one thing. If you're doing it part-time, that's quite another thing. And again, there's a lot of difficulty in writing regulations around that. So what has been going on around the world is that there have been multiple approaches to trying to do this. Obviously in Malaysia, what we're looking at a reform of the system. However, that will take time. In the meantime, what we're doing is really approaching it on a voluntary basis. So I think the existence of platforms actually makes things simpler, because we can approach the platforms themselves and talk to them about really getting their partners, so to speak, into the system. So what we've done with the 50 million grant that the government has provided under Pinjana is actually talk to some of the platforms about auto-enrollment. In other words, you volunteer to contribute to the EPF and SOCSO, unless you want to opt out. And this will be at a lower rate than the statutory rate that we have today, because it's on a voluntary basis. And we'll see how that goes going forward. So we're trying to, a little bit of social engineering, a little bit of appealing to, you know, the fact that people are concerned about, and one thing that did surprise me is that a lot of gig workers are actually interested in providing for their own future as well as their own insurance. So, you know, this hopefully will have good results going forward. One thing that the government has done with this is that they're actually providing a matching grant under the scheme. So they will be actually providing an incentive for people to contribute to the system. So hopefully, you know, going forward, we'll have, I think, some results. We should also be looking at a total reform of the system where we'll have some public involvement in providing support, especially to the informal sector. There's a lot of, I think, 20 issues there, unfortunately, especially around how to finance such a system. But I think there's a lot of interest, and I think there's a recognition that the time has come. And even with, because I've had discussions with some of our international colleagues a couple of weeks ago, and there's a lot of interest in this area. And hopefully we'll, you know, come to a landing sooner or later. Okay, so with that, I think I'll wrap up my remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Norisham. Very salient points, and I think it probably flows well into what you've mentioned at the start on how the diverse nature of work between full-time employees, part-time employees, and the legal nuances or the hurdles you have to get across to come up with some sort of a framework to legalize this process and help workers with a legal framework. But I think it also goes well into our next speaker, who has a very interesting and thought-provoking write-up which I read some time back on a model which can probably be considered and even deeper probably adopted by other groups in different countries on what has happened in Indonesia, in how workers have tried to mobilize and come up with a better response collectively through moving towards unionization, providing better support and better protection for workers. With that, I'll invite our next speaker, Fahmi Panimbang. Fahmi, over to you.
Hello. Thank you, Jay. Yes, Please excuse me for the background, the back sound. It's azan time. Let me start with my first slide of my presentations. Can you see my slides?
Yep, it's good.
Okay, cool. Okay, we'll just finish our research several weeks ago and publish the result of the research. It's about the response of and the resistance of the drivers in Indonesia. Of course, it's still far from the precariats or the informal workers like the drivers, app-based drivers would expect about the result. So I would like to share with you the experiences in Indonesia, how this part of gig economy workers respond to the situations in the context of Indonesia. Quickly about the methodology, we've researched two companies, Gojek and Grab. Certainly, this is two companies that's predominantly playing in the gig economy in Indonesia, in fact, in the region. And we did a semi-structured and structured interview and FGDs with all the drivers, indigenous drivers, app-based drivers, communities, associations, trade unions, and the activists, as well as the researchers. And the location we took cover more than 50% of the total app-based drivers in the country. So we analyze how they mobilize their resources using the power resources approach. And we took one case study, but we will not go into detail of this. Let me begin with the context and the technological change. First, if we talk about the app-based transport development in Indonesia, we've got to look at least 3 points. One is the rapid growth of the motorbike taxi, or we call here in Indonesia as Gojek. So it's, you know, if you look at the number, the rise of sale of motorbikes, it's huge. It's increasing over the years. So hundreds, millions of motorbike being sold in the country. And especially in the past several years, where Chinese motorbike came in and provides very easy installments for getting such motorbikes. So it's very popular and very easy to use, and almost everywhere you can see people use the motorbike. But this is also to show that the public transport system here in the country is also showed very poor. And second context is the developments of smartphone. So since 1998, when Suharto collapsed, the dictatorship ended. There are a number of policy reforms, including telecommunication sector reforms. So there was no more monopoly of the state-owned enterprise, And that starts the developments of different providers. So there are competitions between providers that provide very cheap and affordable telecommunication services. And then the mushrooming of shops, stores, services, and repairment. In fact, the number of mobile phone owned by Indonesians is more than the number of the citizens here. So so it means one person here in Indonesia could own more than one mobile phone. And of course, there are further development of the smartphones, the invention of the smartphone in the past decades, in the past several years, has triggered the innovation of the application for the gig economy in the app-based transport sector. And the third context, I would say that it is interrelated. It is the increasing number of the precariat, so-called precariat, those who are unemployed, those who are informal workers, those who are vulnerable in the economy. So of course, it is a global phenomenon, but to mention in the context of Indonesia, the unemployment number here in Indonesia is almost 7 million before COVID pandemic, with 7 million more half employed, meaning they may employed several days and then the next several days they will be unemployed. So over 14 million unemployments, and with half employment. This provide a context how these precariats can be also easily absorbed in the gig economy, such as app-based transport sector. So let me move to the rise and the emergence of app-based transportation and its discontent. Most of you will know Gojek, Grab. There are two very predominant companies in the application-based transport sector. Gojek here in Indonesia is downloaded by over 15 million people and users, and they are actively used the applications. Gojek has 2.5 million active drivers. And of course, Grab has 9 million drivers across Southeast Asia. And Gojek's value is $1 billion US last year. And it's become a unicorn or decacorn. And still, these two app-based transport companies investors, in fact, provide many financial capital, as well as the we call it as venture capital. However, the expansion of these two companies, well, Uber was here in Indonesia operating, but in 2018, they surrendered and they sold it to Grab. Of course, they gave up operating in the country. In fact, in over Southeast Asia, they gave to the operational to Grab. And these applications based transportations, of course, started in mainly in 2014. Well, Gojek started in 2010. Back then it was, just phone service to order the motorbike taxi. But then in 2014, 2015, it started operating the application as we know today. But it has attract horizontal conflict between the indigenous transport as well as the AdGas drivers. Many incumbent or indigenous transport, by indigenous transport drivers, I mean, they are the incumbent drivers. They are the informal transport drivers, the paratransit like minivans or the conventional motorbike taxi, or we call it Gojek. And of course, it's there were legal controversies because there was no legal, there's no law, there's no regulations that justify or legitimize the operation of these companies. However, our presidents and several other elites in the power support this operation of these two companies. For example, President Joko Widodo, he came all the way to Hanoi in Vietnam to launch the Gojek in the country in Vietnam, and then several times he promote Gojek, attending the meeting with the drivers, and of course he claimed that he once ordered satay and to show that he also used the service of Gojek. And on the other part, Luhut Panjaitan. Luhut is the minister in Joko Widodo administration. He also supported Grab. The government provide the tender or provide the support allowing Grab to operate, to dominate, to operate in all the airports in all over Sumatra Island. So there are, you see that there are power relations, there are legal controversies. First, it's illegal, and then drivers mobilized by the company to demand the legalizations of the operations, and then now it become illegal and operational. Let me move to next slide. Questions that we may ask is, are app-based drivers entrepreneurs or they are precariats 4.0? So the companies always claim that the drivers are micro entrepreneurs. They say that they work for themselves. they are free to take orders whenever they want or not. But the research that we found showed very contradictory to this claim. So I'll elaborate 4 points here. It's about the impact of the rise of app-based transportations. One is a domination of app-based transport companies. You know, it's increasingly dominant. People are, you know, attracted by very cheap and affordable price of app-based transport. Certainly, this is you know, subsidized by the huge amount of capital of the companies. But you know, gradually, for example, in key and strategic areas in Jakarta, the capital, the number of indigenous transport being increased, no more attracted by the passengers. People are more attracted and using the app-based transport instead. So this, you know, in the long run, this will harm the necessity of okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, Swami, go ahead.
Sorry, it's unstable in my end. Let me continue. The second point I would like to share is the, you know, the imbalance in bargaining power. If we look at the I mean, our respondents throughout our research complain power. You know, the tariff increase and decrease, it's decided by the company. They just receive the notification their message service or the applications. There is no contract at all. There is, of course, previous speakers, but as well as the speakers in the last 2 days also mentioned about the bargaining power or of the drivers, or in general the gig economy workers. They don't have actually bargaining power to bargain with. Point or explain about the algorithmic labor control. Like in the workplace, like in the factory, like in the offices, there are people controlling, you know, the employee their behavior. But now in the gig economy situation, it's become easier, a lot easier for the company to control the worker, control the driver, to control the gig workers. In fact, it's even deeper because with the algorithm, workers or the drivers easily you know, detect how and when they should, you know, walk. And I would mention here that the, you know, like in the previous slide, I mentioned that the app-based first claim they will solve, but reality, they are not free. Of course, they work for themselves, but in a way they actually provide profits, huge amount of profits to the companies. And it's not about the profits in terms of money, but also, you know, the data that's gathered through the applications, both applications that by the workers or the driver, as well as the user, the customers. So with algorithmic labor control, the drivers are heavily controlled. In fact, they are not free. They have to take the order. If they don't, they will be, you know, notified as not working properly. Then they will get, you know, bad remark. The performance level will be declined, and so forth. So that's in general. The fourth point here, I would also mention about occupational safety and health problems. You know, with the algorithmic labor control, drivers are, you know, driven. Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Fahmi.
Okay.
Yeah, I think your line is a bit spotty, but could you wrap up your opening remarks before we move on to the next speaker?
Okay.
On your final point, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. My final points here, I would share with you about you know, how could gig workers achieve more bargaining power? First, recognition of at-best driver as workers who entitled to labor rights. All speakers agree that at the moment, the drivers, they don't have bargaining power. They are even not recognized as the workers who entitled to. Second point, we have to provide space of negotiations and space for even the use of the drivers who are legal, legitimized. They are even prevent from negotiation. And I would conclude with 3 points here. First, technological change of at-best transports is mostly predominantly emanates from business interests rather than societal, because, you know, it's really heavily driven by the business need of the people to such service. Second, structural power and distributive power. Highlight here that the organizations here in Malaysia are aware that they are strategic point in the production of the transport. So they try to negotiate, try to show and mobilize their power. And third point is solidarity building and mutual aid among drivers. So this demonstrates a driver's great potential through the significant associational power resources. Also, earlier in my slide, which I couldn't explain, that's actually among the drivers, there are solidarity building, solidarity practices that is implement mutual on the drivers, which show how they can in. Thank you, Jay. Sorry for
No worries. Thank you, Fahmi. I think you wrapped up your points really well. I think there's no need for me to reiterate what you have said. I think despite some of the spotty connections, very important experience you shared with us. I would also recommend that once after the session is over, that we get a chance to share your write-up with our audience, who I think find it very, very useful, because a lot of details there, which maybe we might not be able to look at the whole model, but aspects which can be used in Southeast Asian countries and even beyond. Now I will move on to our third speaker, Tan Zaigen. I've introduced this now, but just maybe I go through briefly for those of you who have just joined us. Zygan is a research manager at the Asia School of Business, and he was formerly a research associate at Khazanah Research Institute. He's done tremendous research on the gig economy, how technology impacts informal workers, and also, interestingly enough, some work on food security, but I don't think we're going to talk about that today. Zygan, over to you.
All right, thanks, JJ. Let me share my screen again. All right, cool. So, can everyone see my slides? If that's
Yep, it's on the screen.
okay, great. Okay, thanks again for inviting me, and thanks Ressa for inviting me to talk about some of the work that I'm doing on the digital platform work. So this work is actually in collaboration with my ex-colleagues in Khazanah Research Institute, and what we like to do is to shed light on this, as you know, the previous two speakers have been mentioning, right? This new and growing group of gig economy workers. I think the main aim here is to understand who are they, right? And by understand who they are, what are the characteristics, especially in an emerging country like Malaysia, how can we then help them or create policies that will allow these jobs to be less informal, or in a way less vulnerable. So I think to start off with, sort of I wouldn't reiterate, what we have been discussing about, what is a gig, right? So I think it's been clear that gig work is temporary, it's a short-term arrangement, and many a times it's with independent workers. And as Noisham has also pointed out, right, many of these gig workers are informal, right? They are without social protection. They're without retirement schemes behind them, or even some without health insurance, or even workplace safety. But there's also the other part of it, which we would like to highlight, right? And that some of these workers, not all, right, they do non-decent work, right? So what do we mean by non-decent work? So if you look at figure 2 in the slides, we think about non-decent work. The work itself sort of summarized in these 5 points. 1, some of the work itself has uncertain working hours. And I think in the UK, there has been instances of where workers are given 0-hour contract, and workers in a way have no choice. If you want a job, and if you're requested to come and work at 12 a.m. in the morning, you have to do it, right? So, and those hours are not secure or certain. Secondly, there is a blurred work-life boundaries. And this, I think, when we talk about how the gig workers in the digital world, how this would become, right? Thirdly, and as we have mentioned in informality, sort of economic and social insecurity. Fourth, and I think Fahmi's work especially really highlights this, right? There's a huge imbalance, right? Of power between firms and workers. Right? The workers, because they're not employees, they may not be accorded the kind of authority or power to be able to lodge complaints and so on with the companies that technically employ them, right, or give contracts to them. And finally, some unequal taxation burden. So in some countries, workers, even if you are a gig worker, you are taxed. However, companies may be taxed less because you have technically fewer employees, formal employees, and that conversion from former employee to it's kind of contract work, creates that non-decentness where there's that imbalance of firms will earn more, but yet they're taxed less because of that. So where I want to go deeper in is to then examine how digital platform workers or digital platform gig workers come into this. Are they similar? Right. That's the first question in mind. You have this new technology that allows this platform that matches workers to jobs anywhere in the world. How does this, is this similar, right, to the traditional gig work that we are looking about, and especially when gig work, digital gig work, it's been touted by some as it's the ideal job. It's flexible. You can work anywhere. You can get incomes from. If especially you come from a developing country, you can get incomes from a developed country. So, but here we want to argue that they are also these digital gig workers also do have the characteristics of your traditional gig work, the vulnerabilities of traditional gig work. And to start off with, I think it's important for us to scrutinize, right, the details of how these platforms work and how they organize, right, these workers. To give a context, right, so when you look at this new digital gig work, these works and tasks that we're giving in platforms, they range from a very, very wide group of different types of tasks to be done. Right. So one end, you have the highly complex work that can be done by, for example, we call it digital work, right? In our first bullet point, things like freelance computer programmers, app developers, down to if you look at micro tasks, which are very repetitive works, such as just visually using the human as if it's a human computer, right? Identifying images and so on to help train a machine. So these are very repetitive work and generally paid much less than the kind of complex work. And finally, work that is mediated, right, through the kind of through apps, right? So the work is not done online, but it's done elsewhere. For example, Grab, ride hailing, and so on. So, and in terms of a centralization, how these platforms organize these workers, it also spans from very highly centralized low worker agency kind of apps. So if you think about, for example, ride hailing, Grab car, right? Your workers have much less say on the kind of jobs they take. And it's all determined, mainly determined by the algorithm. So the algorithm has a lot of power there, down to the kind of very highly decentralized systems where, for example, care.com, where it serves like an advertisement space for workers to promote themselves and so on these platforms. And have a little more choice in who their clients are. But when you observe, looking through the literature, given this huge variation, there is still shared characteristics that many of them are informal, like they're not protected in social, in terms of their social security and so on, and they are not also given skills training, right? And I think example of this is, for example, if there are any workplace accidents, right? Say while you're cleaning a client's house, matched through these platforms. At the end of the day, the platform will treat you as an independent contractor. If anything happens, that is on the workers themselves, right? Despite them actually kind of working as if they are employees, right? And especially in a world where right now policies are still favoring, or in a way still tied towards employers, this happens this vulnerability still happens for this digital platform workers. And then on another part, I think one point risk highlighting is also the risk of de-skilling, right? So some developing countries are touting that the digital gig work is the work for the future to build up developing countries. You can get jobs in, my skilled workers can get jobs in developed countries, not in developing countries. But for some of this, but as you see this huge variation of platform work, some of these works don't exactly increase the kind of skills in the workforce that will be able to help to build the country, right? I think when you think about work like repetitive Amazon work where you're just clicking, identifying images, it's hard to see what kind of skills you can gain from that. It's not even about reaching up to programming. So there's a risk of promoting these policies and yet stagnating the kind of average skill levels in the country. And so this is one way of us having to look at what is the effect of the nuanced way of looking at the promises of new digital gig work, and also sort of the baggages that they carry still, and its characteristics that share from traditional gig work. So to go more specifically on understanding who these workers are, and who are the workers who will be affected by this. So in the first part, when you look at a lot of the surveys and the studies done, most of them are done in rich, advanced countries. right? And here in this slide, I showed you sort of these 5 bullet points of roughly what are the numbers that they are. And I think to quickly summarize what they found is, one, these workers have been growing very fast. So we look at bullet point number 2, when they look at Microsoft's platform work, they've been seeing a whopping increase of 14% per annum per year, right? And another point to note is that point number 4, when you look at most of these workers are young, well-educated, and they are male, right? So I think then the question is, how about Malaysia, right? So look at Malaysia. One, the KRI has done excellent work on trying to understand informality as a whole, right, in Malaysia. That's on figure 4 on the left, right? But if you look at figure 5, specifically on trying to understand digital gig work, one way of looking at it is looking at the participation in the global Microsoft platform. Right? We found that they have been increasing by 7.8% between 2018 to 2019, right? So this shows, it is growing fairly fast. But the question is, who are these workers? And this is where my work currently is trying to look at, right? Who are the workers who are participating in this gig economy work? So we study a matching platform hosted by the Malaysian Digital Economy Corporation, an agency in charge of building up the digital economy in Malaysia, that matches workers, potential workers, and workers through these online digital platforms. Right? So using their database, we find that most of these workers are young, which matches sort of the global trend. Female, which is also sort of a reverse, right? Globally, there are more male, about 60% are male workers through a World Bank survey. But here we find that there are 54% of them are female and highly educated, right? And most of them are degree workers, which we will show later. And I think that, okay, right, what are the bigger determinants on how active they are on this platform? Firstly, infrastructure, right? It's having access to digital infrastructure allows these workers, regardless of whether or not young they're old, to be able to go on these platforms, right? Secondly, having abilities to use emails regularly and so on, that also becomes another big tool, instead of inherently in the demographic differences, right? So to dig a bit deeper in terms of education, we find the largest group of workers are degree holders, right, followed by SPM holders. SPM, which is sort of O levels equivalent, it's like high school graduation equivalent. This kind of matches global trends. And if you compare to Malaysia, majority of Malaysians in the workforce are indeed SPM holders. And when you look at the location where they come from, yes, vast majority come from Selangor, which is the most developed and most urban state in Malaysia. But Sabah is 4th, right? Sabah is one of the more rural states, so perhaps state development might not be as significant. But however, this is still work in progress. We are still trying to understand more about this. So, and we can, I think, discuss more about this in a bit later. So I think I would just want to close by going through some of what we think, given what we know and what we have been discussing through the whole day, what I think, right, are the 3 areas, policy areas that we can think about in preparing the workforce for such work. Because at the end of the day, gig work does provide jobs, does provide opportunities, but how do we sort of protect them from the downside? And the first part is what we have talked about, right? The idea of portable benefits, redesigning welfare arrangements to move away from being based on just employers or being tied to employers, but towards employees, right? So including, for example, health insurance. To give an example, Grab Singapore has worked with the Singaporean government, right, to contribute to the Singaporean equivalent of sort of Medicare, sorry, in the US. Right? So Singapore's Grab will contribute per mile driven by their drivers into their health insurance named Medisave. And I think in Malaysia, we do have such examples too, right? The Self-Employment Social Security Scheme under SOCSO, and also EPFs, as Hisham has mentioned, right? The voluntary self-employed contribution. So to move some of this employer type benefits from employer to employee instead. The second part is also very much of what we have been discussing previously, the idea where training is tied towards employers, right? And in Malaysia, we do have the Human Resource Development Fund, where it's supposed to help encourage and incentivize companies to train their workers. But given that, in a world where there are more gig work, they're more self-employed, and how do we should move that towards having workers themselves be in charge of training themselves, right? And especially when we do higher wage online work, you do need more complex skills, right? Instead of just the kind of low wage micro task skill that is available on a digital world. And I think Singapore's Skills Future policy, where they grant every Singaporean, I think $200 a year to invest into their own training, is one example. And I think the third part is also what Fahmi has been mentioning, right? The idea of giving more power to platform workers. But at the end of the day, they do not have a strong voice, or much voice, in fact, even in, for example, in industrial courts, which would require unions or former unions to support. And one idea, looking at what is happening in the US, where older formal unions such as the truckers union, the metal workers union, are co-opting a lot of platform workers and helping them, right, build this voice through these formal unions to assert their power and to influence policies even. So I think this is sort of my short presentation of the three the areas, policy areas that we have, and also a short introduction to how we are in Malaysia. So yeah, stay tuned to also our upcoming report on this. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Zaigan. Looking forward to the report. Certainly sounds interesting, and based on what you've shared on the points, I think there's a cross-cutting theme between what our three presenters have shared with us on the balance of power between employees and platform workers, and how it's heavily skewed on one end, but also on some examples of how there can be some push from both unions and policy makers as well as legislators to redraw the balance of power to make it more equitable. And also, Zaigan, on your point of there being a bit of a different experience in Malaysia, where there is a higher number of female workers in the platform-based applications as opposed to the global trend. Maybe I will point some questions to you on that specifically a bit later. Now, as our three speakers have finished, before opening up the floor for direct questions from the audience, we will have a short commentary by Professor Boy Luthier, who is the Director of Technology and Industry Research Center at the Institute of Public Policy at South China University of Technology in Guangzhou. Professor Boy has done extensive research. He has been a consultant for unions in Germany and other areas, and has written quite a bit on how unionization can move forward and bring platform-based workers into the same sphere and widen that social safety net, which is severely needed at this point. Professor Boy, you have 10 minutes for your commentary. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to comment on these very stimulating contributions. And also thanks to FES and REFSA to organize such a conference and to pick this topic up. Especially from the perspective of the impact of the coronavirus on work, and whether it leads to further precarization, or whether we can also find some new perspectives for social organizing and defending social rights and decent work. The three contributions were all very rich. Provided a lot of data and a lot of interesting insight on the particular topics. But I also think they showed us what we not know about the platforms and digitalization, and also some of the open policy questions. And I would like, in my comment, I would like to focus on the open questions, also in order to keep it keep it short. Nur Hisham Hussein's contribution gave a very comprehensive analysis of mainly the broader social and labor market impacts on automation and digitalization, especially with regard to Malaysia. We can say this is the situation reflects most of the developments in both developed countries and also the bigger emerging economies like in China. We can say that of course digitalization of the economy and automation has a massive impact on jobs. We can say there is an expansion of irregular work, and there is a general tendency to individualize employment relationships and thereby also affect traditional collective bargaining relationships. I was trying to, or I listened carefully to Nur Hisham's discussion of the automation effects of digitalization, especially in the manufacturing sector. Well, I heard I heard or I felt that even the very detailed data he gave about Malaysia do not really let us know whether digitalization, especially in the manufacturing sector, finally is a job killer, or whether it creates new growth fields, maybe of lower wage jobs, and also restructuring of the industrial workforce and also the service sector workforce. We have this problem here in China. We have seen that we have heard about all the stories about digitalization leading to the manless factory and the light out factory and what the words are. But when we look at the reality, automation has only proceeded slowly. And there are a few digital flagship projects here, some highly automated factories, and also some very sophisticated, mostly internet-based supply chain systems. But in general, we have to say that most of the automation here, and I presume this would be similar in Malaysia and other developing countries in Southeast Asia, has been more of a, let's say, of a catch-up nature, where formerly low-tech and manual assembly work now is becoming automated at levels that we have seen in industrialized countries a long time ago, but it does not really have to do with well, what is called Industry 4.0 or advanced automation concepts. So my question is to Nur Hisham, maybe you could discuss a little more try to relate your discussion a little more to the real level of development of automation and also its various impacts in Malaysia. I would be keen to hear this. On Fahmi's contribution, we got a very detailed analysis of the app-based transport and driver sector in Indonesia, and again, it's very similar to what we see in Europe, in the US, in China, and the questions are pretty much the same. Are the workers micro-entrepreneurs, or are the drivers micro-entrepreneurs, or are they some kind of, are they just precariat or precarious workers? We also would have to define what this means, how precarity is defined. We see imbalance in bargaining power, and we see the very familiar question of whether these workers receive the rights of being recognized as employees. One question I would be interested in, and I would like to introduce here when we talk about platform work, is the context of how these platforms develop and the social and economic power relations behind this. Tan Jai-gen had addressed it in his contribution later on. One of the big questions that we're discussing here in China is, apart from the question of how to regulate the status of the employees in the platform-based service and increasingly also manufacturing industries, by the way. But the major question that arrives, given the size of the platforms and their de facto role as public infrastructures. You look at WeChat in China. This is a public infrastructure like the telephone system or the power system. These platforms need, and these public infrastructures need regulation. That's the big issue. Not just regarding to their labor practices, but regarding everything: their market power, their financing, their impact on competition. All these questions. I would like to hear a little more, or maybe we should also discuss this and address this as an open question here in the discussion: how the situation and how discussions about this topic are in the respective countries you were talking about. On the last contribution, Tan Jai-gen, it is, yes, it is, I have to say it again, the same situation or the same effects of the platform work, like precarization and individualization and deregulation. The question, I think one point that was very important in his contribution is the question of informality. The question is, what do we really understand by informal work or by informalization, or to use the European concept of precarization? The contribution pointed out that the number of, or the proportion of informality among workers in Malaysia always has been very high. So I noted 39% for 2005 as a figure. So the question is, what does informalization mean in this context? And does the platform economy really add a new dimension of formalization, of informalization, or can we also see, based on the development background of the respective countries, can we also see some formalization of work? We have seen this here in China, that the work of the Didi drivers, Didi is the Chinese Uber, as you probably know, has become pretty formalized and regulated in most cities. For instance, the city of Guangzhou, where I live, which is one of the very big ones in China, has regulated or has put regulations in place that the fares and the hiring conditions and everything have to be equal for Didi cars and traditional taxis. And Didi is, or the other platforms are required to show to connect the consumer in their platforms, both to taxis and to Didi cars. Plus, there's even the apps even show you comparison of prices and of customer satisfaction and everything for taxis and Didi cars. The whole thing has really contributed to some kind of formalization of the work, especially on the part of the Didi drivers. And we also see, related to some of the labor conflicts that we really recently had, or the organizing that's going on, the Didi drivers form their own basic professional associations, mostly through WeChat chat groups. And they keep chatting with each other about the employment conditions and about their rights and about the behavior of the platform. And they also wage some kind of bargaining on basic questions through these platforms. So, and on the whole, we can see, and we have some interesting research going on here in our institute on this topic. There is some degree of professionalization and a professional, or let's say a trade consciousness emerging among the driver, which is totally developing in the absence of trade unions. The trade unions in China do not take care of any of these workers, or almost just very little. So the question is, the question is, to discuss a little more, or to look a little more at the twofold, or at the contradictory effects of formalization of work and platformization of work. Maybe not everything points towards precarization and informalization, especially also among when the workforce is higher skilled, like in the examples that were cited in the contribution. So I would like to hear a little more about this. If I have 1 or 2 more minutes, I would also raise one last question to all of the contributors. What about manufacturing? What is the impact in the respective countries of platform-based work or supply chain management on manufacturing? A development that we have here, and that we also had analyzed in some publications also published by FES here in China, is that the large e-commerce platforms here, the biggest one is Taobao, owned by Alibaba, that they also create massive mechanisms to increase the competition between all the industrial companies, most of them small and medium-sized enterprises that supply to these networks. And this has massive impact on the economic situation. It massively stifles competition, leads to cutthroat competition between the companies, and finally also to a significant informalization of industrial work, which means as the volumes for the e-commerce based trade often grow smaller and smaller, but the delivery requirements and the flexibility requirements and the time requirements are getting tougher and tougher. The small and medium-sized companies do a lot of out-contracting of certain work, let's say sewing of garment, or making some consumer goods or the components for it, to very small or even family-based companies. And this, in fact, is some kind of gig work in manufacturing. We think this is also a very, very important and important question that needs consideration and, of course, political regulation. I would be interested to hear a little more from Indonesia, Malaysia, and other countries present here in this discussion about this experience. So thanks for your attention at this moment, and again, thanks for your very good contributions. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Bui. You've managed to direct the conversation in a very specific area. And if I could pick up on your final point to be the first question for our panelists on the impact of manufacturing on platform-based work. You've highlighted the possibility, the very real possibility, both in Asia and in the US as well with Amazon, on how formal work could be made informal in time to come. Could I maybe point that question to Nur Hisham first, and then maybe our other panelists who would like to take it up?
Okay. It's a bit of a complex question because if you look at the manufacturing landscape in Malaysia, it's primarily dominated by MNCs. So they have their own internal markets. They serve, we'll have manufacturing subsidiaries here serving their parent companies. So that's about 70% of manufacturing activity in Malaysia. Now we do have our own SMEs as well as some OEMs, and obviously there's some standout companies like the glove makers, for example. But I think as far as automation is concerned, just let me quote some numbers here. Over the last 20 years or so, output in the manufacturing sector has more or less doubled. But the labor force in the manufacturing sector has been relatively stagnant. It was about 2 million in 2000, and it's about 2 million today. So there obviously has been some impact in terms of automation, but I think it's been fairly uneven. I know that originally we started off as primarily labor intensive, low value added, but I think some of the more recent FDI coming in has been very, very highly automated. And I heard about this one factory proposal where it's like supplying something like 5% of tires to the global market, and it employs only 6 workers. So there is a high degree of automation that's coming in, especially with the more recent, I think, industries that have been coming up. Also, I think touching a little bit on the rise of informality in the manufacturing sector, I do know that a lot of for example, some of the medium-sized companies, they employ primarily contract workers. So you're on a 6-month or 9-month contract. There's no EPF paid, no SOCSO paid. So you got very little in terms of social protection. But it's not exactly full-time employment. So there are an increasing proportion of workers who are actually working on project-based, I think, contracts like this. I think Zaigan actually mentioned 0-hour contracts. Unfortunately, that's here as well in the services sector. So I think as far as manufacturing is concerned, we're seeing a little bit of both trends going on here. And there is an increasing degree of automation happening here.
Mm-hmm. Hi, JJ. Can I jump in on this?
Yes,
so, no, I think the question from Professor Boy is great because currently I'm actually working on a project with the Work of the Future initiative in MIT, part of the industrial productivity team there, to try to understand exactly that question in Malaysia, right? Going down to survey these companies to find out, right, what level of automation and how does it impact the workers. And so far what we found is, I think as Nur Hisham has mentioned, it's dominated by the MNCs, but the SMEs are much more lagging behind in terms of that kind of automation, and some find that they do not need to. They just stay in their own sort of market, traditional market that they have been, for example, food manufacturing, right? So I think it's perhaps similar to what you see at least in China, where sort of the smaller guys are still sort of slowly moving up, but still not there yet, while the MNCs have or companies have come in or invested from FDIs and so on have gone ahead further. So we are slowly finding that pattern, but yeah, again, watch this space. We are still working on this project to try to tease it out. And then we will compare with sort of Brazil and Turkey, see what are the experiences in emerging countries like us, right? Are there differences, right? When industrial policy in Brazil and Malaysia is quite different, right? And see what the impact.
Yeah, there's a massive productivity difference between large companies versus SMEs.
Yeah, for sure. Fahmi, you want to comment on that as well? Your experience in Indonesia, and maybe take up a following question as well. You can answer it on trying to organize and mobilize gig workers? I mean, do you think that can be achieved in the short to medium term, or would another approach be better for us to undertake?
Yeah, yeah, it's still challenging to organize and to mobilize the drivers to be recognized as workers that entitled to labor rights. The exact problem is exactly the questions that been raised by Professor Luce, that there's no regulation to protect the drivers. No recognitions as to the drivers or overall in general the gig economy workers. The regulations that have been produced so far mostly on transportations and the legalizations of the app-based transport operations, which was illegal in the couple years. It's just legalized recently. And the other point is that there was no engagement. There hasn't been engagement from Labor Ministry or Human Resource Ministry in Malaysian context in regulating the workers' rights in the gig economy, such as drivers. But as I have found in our research, there are massive mobilizations, organizing is going on. We are very hopeful and optimistic that we will be able to organize, and we'll push the governments and also the companies to be respectful to the labor rights.
Thank you, Fahmi. To our audience, we've had about a strong 60 who have stayed with us so far. Thank you very much. I would invite you to put down your questions in the tab below so that we can raise more to our panelists. While waiting for more questions to come in, maybe I'll just point some others which we have noted throughout this session. To Nur Hisham, again, back to you. You suggested that the numbers have shown a big mismatch between the jobs on offer versus people who go and take up education to ultimately take up these jobs. There's more people who are into education, and then obviously you have more graduates unemployed in the end, and we see that a lot in Malaysia. Do you see that only as a question of industries being slowly phasing out, or is it a question of the education sector needing to move forward?
I think we have to rethink about the role of education. Well, partly, it's the East Asian culture. You have to go to university, get a job, etc., etc. I think we need to realize that the workforce of the future will be quite a bit different, and the kind of skills you need are going to be radically different. I mean, this is not just a Malaysian problem alone. I mean, despite all the commentary and news and from politicians and the like, the reality is that the youth unemployment situation in Malaysia isn't as bad as you can see in other countries. I mean, we're roughly on par with, for example, Australia and the like. The European situation is like 20% youth unemployment, and they have an even higher portion of graduates than we do. So this is a global problem. And I think one thing is that, especially for kids entering the work, thinking about their future, they really need to look at what the real requirements of the workforce actually is. A degree is no longer a guarantee of a job. For that matter, it's no guarantee of the kind of skills you actually need to get employment or even employment opportunities. So there is that mismatch in terms of what the workforce is, what the labor force is providing, what the labor market is providing versus what's coming into the market. Also in terms of the skills mismatch. I think it's far more important to focus on the basic skills that you actually need, that companies are looking for, rather than specific specializations. Because one thing I think that's going to be a bigger and bigger, feature of work going forward is that you're no longer thinking about just one career. You're talking about multiple careers during your work life, because you are likely to be economically active until, in Malaysia's case, up to the age of 75, way past retirement age. So and obviously with the way that the business environment is evolving, the kind of skills that people need are going to change over a 10, 15-year period. So you're going to have to be able to adjust mid-career to the new requirements of the workforce. There's a lot of new careers opening up today. I mean, data scientists, we never heard about data scientists 5, 10 years ago, right? And now it's the hot thing. But I bet, 5, 10 years from now, it's going to be something totally different. We're going to have, AI trainers and stuff like that. So the ability to pivot is going to be much more in demand than, a degree in accounting, for example. So the degree is only the basis of a career, but the kind of skills you need to actually be gainfully employed throughout your working life, you're going to have to be able to pivot very, very quickly.
Right, certainly very important. Thanks, Norisham. Zaiken, if I could go back to you now. One very important thing which you raised, I think, in your presentation was the difference in the gender balance in Malaysia as compared to the global trend. Globally, you have more males in the gig work sector as opposed to females. In Malaysia, it's the reverse. Could I just pick your thoughts a bit more? Why do you think that is? And more importantly, what would be the impact? Because you already see some sort of a imbalance in the rights of male workers and female workers in Malaysia. So will that exacerbate further with having an increased number of women in the workforce in the gig economy sector?
No. So I think to caveat that data set, right? Yeah. A majority of my data set does not have the sort of ride-hailing workers, right? So drivers and so on are still male-dominated. But the global numbers that I look at does not include them anyway. So they are more of the micro-task, digital work anyway. So it's true, right? Therefore, Malaysia seems to be a reverse of the world. But I think perhaps it might also be because of how our labor force have been, right? At least in the younger, it seems given that this workforce in this digital platform is younger, we know that there are more female degree holders and so on, at least in the younger group. So I think it's probably also due to the fact that given that more degree holders actually are going on these platforms, therefore the balance became more of more female. So I think that is, so when you think in terms of imbalance of treatment and so on, maybe we are thinking of a broader issue than just sort of a digital platform, right? So we're also thinking in terms of our workforce becoming females having a higher education level, which is already true, than males. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. For me, if I can bring you back into the conversation to answer one of the questions from our audience. It's an anonymous name, I wonder why. Anyway, the question goes like this. A province in South Korea, which is also a manufacturing hub, is rolling out UBI, so Universal Basic Income, as not a welfare policy, but an economic policy. Do you see that in any way trying to redraw the balance between power of a gig worker and an employee in a traditional sense?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can address the questions correctly, but yes, of course, it's still a different context here in Indonesia, where the drivers they are even still trying to be recognized. It's still far to talk about universal basic income, even for the existing formal workers here in Indonesia. Still, the minimum wage regulation is still on very heated debate and changing, and now it's set automatically by the governments, not negotiated every year as before. So back to the context of the gig economy workers, I think it's still very difficult for the drivers to bring that issue. Of course, basic income or the minimum wage, a monthly minimum wage, is one of the demands by the drivers when they trying to negotiate with the employers.
Right, thanks, Swami. Over to you again, Risham. There's a question by Siti Tumin, one of our audience, who asks this. A contribution rate for the self-employed is lower compared to a traditional employee-employer system. Now, how do you think this would affect the long-term sustainability of the EPF? I think it's a question always being asked and debated quite heavily. But since it's been asked, I put it forward to you again.
Okay. The reality is that even with the employer contribution and at the current statutory rates, most people don't have enough.
Yeah.
So I believe that at this moment in time, it's probably more important to improve coverage than it is to improve adequacy. We need to get everybody under the system first before we can start looking at really making sure that they have enough. Because the unfortunate problem that we have is that it's a systemic one, is that most people just don't earn enough to save enough for retirement anyway, right? So in a certain sense, whether it's a higher rate or lower rate is immaterial. Because even with a much higher rate, you're not going to save enough for retirement. So we really need to have a look at redesigning the system so that it caters for most situations. For example, in Japan, what they have is actually a multi-layer system where you have this basic minimum pension that's provided by the government, and then you have contributory pensions, retirement savings on top of that, based on sector, based on industry, based on company level even. So we'll need to really look at multiple ways of saving rather than just depending on EPF alone. So again, in a certain way, I think the onus of looking after retirement falls back on the individual. And what we're trying to do is actually provide some of the education and advice to enable workers to do that.
That means a lot of work is going to be done on that restructuring of the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to take a while.
Of course. Zygan, one question to you also from our audience. Shin Yao Yim asks, she views the rise of the gig economy as a transitional job, which moves on to something which is a bit unclear at this point, what the future of a post-gig economy will look like. The fact that we're having more of these jobs, she says, is not a healthy development. Now, how would you respond to that? What would be your comment on that?
I think, to be honest, it's hard to say, right? Because on one hand, it may not be a healthy development, but if jobs and also sort of industrial processes, business processes are going to higher fragmentation and sort of unbundling of more and more unbundling of different tasks, maybe jobs may be becoming more towards addressing certain tasks. And I think Hisham did also mention it in his talk. So I think to us, yes, it could be. To me, it could be yes, transitional, difficult. But if this is the reality of what future work may become, then therefore I think you need policies to deal with it. In a way, we are saying that it's not about whether we want to, but it's just when will that come true. It may not end up as such. Things may change. But I think the way I think about gig economy is that given that the rising trend is coming in, it seems like this will be part of the future of work with even a large minority of workers, even in a lower bound, will be in this kind of work. How then do we think about securing their work, right? Securing their lives, and also helping them have that consistent upskills, upgrading, and so on, to be able to find the next job, and the next job. So yeah, that's how I see it. Yeah.
Okay. And Shin Yao Yim also asked a second question. I think I'll put this to all three of our panelists. She asked, in Malaysia, the union voice is lacking and isn't exactly a harmonious relationship between the employer, the employee and the union. How do you think a policy can change this and arriving to some sort of a win-win situation between workers and employers? And I don't think it just applies only to Malaysia. I think it happens in many other countries. So Fahmi, you can come in as well. Maybe Zaigan, over to you first, and then Fahmi, and then Norisham will have the last word.
Yep. So yeah, I agree. I think in terms of union voice, it hasn't been exactly harmonious. And I think if I reflect back on what some of the work that's done in US in terms of unions, they too do not really have this, great relationship either, right? But the path forward seem to be not so much just about so what policy can do, but also trying to activate, right, or reactivate a union. Union membership in Malaysia has fallen quite a lot, right? Now, how do we strengthen unions again? I think Malaysian unions have been weakened by various laws, and I think this is historical. It's a historical trend itself. But how do we reactivate it? And I think in the US, that's one way they did it is through then getting this union to say, hey, you cannot no longer stay among your metal workers. Your metal workers are shrinking, right? The population of metal workers are shrinking. Similarly, in Germany, I think IG Metall have also evolved, right? So if these established unions starting to reach out to these new gig workers and helping them to go through it, if policy blocks and does not allow these workers to enter this union, maybe that has to change. But other than that, I think a lot of it comes down to unions and the unions' willingness to also work with employers and to change their view from an purely antagonistic view to also try to be more cooperative and complementary, right? So I think this, I don't know, I'm not sure how policy can change that, but I think certainly encouraging and strengthening our union institutions would be the key here.
And Fahmi, what about you and your experience in Indonesia when it relates to unions?
Yeah, it's better than what is happening in Malaysia, of course, because of the freedom of associations. But of course, freedom of association is also political, and it's a space that's full of political contentions. But at least what we have done as of the workers and the labor movements transform the drivers to also provide them capacities to mobilize and to organize. But of course, how to change this policy? First, we have to bear in mind that the status of independent contractor, rather than the workers that entitled to labor rights. It's internationally by the driver unions, driver groups, driver organizations, F-based driver organizations. I would say it's there are a number of organizations globally mobilize and gather to voice out together to demand the companies and the governments to respect the labor rights and to change, to recognize that the drivers also workers and no more independent contractors as they claimed. So in Indonesian context, I think we need related government institutions, not only, currently it's only Ministry of Information and Telecommunications. And then on the other side, it's also Ministry of Transportations. But no involvement of the Ministry of Labor or Human Resource in Malaysian context. So these three ministries or government agencies need to sit down and set policies that respect to labor rights. Thank you.
So for me, it sounds like there is hope, but there's a lot of work to be done. Norisham, you want to have the final word?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to comment so much on this, but I do want to add that, given that some of these platforms are international, the ability of unions to actually act as a voice for their partners or workers under those platforms is going to be quite limited. Also, I think the workers themselves, because the likelihood is that they will be on multiple platforms, having a union focus on one particular platform is probably suboptimal. So it's I think we'll need to come up with something new. And you know, when the need arises, I think people try to figure out the best solutions, and we'll probably come up with something or other. But the reality is, I think the traditional union as it stands today probably cannot actually give as strong a voice as it could have, or it might have. So we will probably need to look at either, you know, multilateral cooperation on a national level or an international level, as well as, I think, some agreement on standards. So again, a lot of work to be done here.
Right, I think that ends on a positive note. At least we know where to focus our efforts to.
Yeah.
I have to thank each one of you, Zaigen, Norisham, Fahmi, wonderful contributions who have, I think, we've gone into great detail over the last 2 hours, lots to take home, and I hope you at home, the audience, have got some questions you have answered. Maybe not all of you have managed to answer questions, maybe you're just taking some time to digest the thoughts and information put out by our panelists. But thank you for joining us. Professor Boy, a very enlightening contribution from you on your commentating just now. And you helped steer the discussion in a very directed manner. I will now pass the mic over to Dr. Kun Wadrana, who will take over, have a one-on-one interview in the following session. Dr. Kun, over to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, JJ. It's a good session. Good afternoon, everyone, sister and brothers. Yeah, my name is Kun Wardana. I'm a director of ICTS sector in the Uni Global Union Asia Pacific. So in this 1 hour, I will moderate the session 3B, which will discuss about the topic of spotlight on the app-based transport and medical work. So from the previous session, which is on the session 3A, we have heard about a lot of information on the gig workers from many perspectives. Yeah. We hear that the trend of gig employment, the impact to the workers, the job security, and also the legislation, education and training, solidarity and bargaining power, even the gender dimension. So now in this session, we will interview and discuss directly with those workers with the highlight on the app-based transport work and medical work. And we are happy here that with us, we have 2 experienced persons. First is Arif Ashraf Ali. He is the president of Grab Driver Association, GDMA, Malaysia. Arif Ashraf started his career as a full-time Grab driver since 2015. And afterwards, he was appointed as Grab authorized Alpha driver and a fleet manager to recruit and train newly registered Grab drivers. And over the past 5 years, he has improved more than 1,000 part-time or full-time Grab drivers in their family gross income. So being a GDMA president, he advised government-related departments such as Ministry of Transport, APAT, and also GIG compliance of E-Hailing Act 2017 for all Malaysian e-hailing drivers. I think this is a very interesting interview. And secondly, I would like also to introduce the second speakers, Dr. Rubini Krishnan. Dr. Rubini currently works as a medical doctor in Tawau General Hospital. which is the forefront of the COVID-19 since the recent rise of cases in this area. So she started her career as medical doctor in 2018, and she obtained her bachelor degree in medicine, surgery, and the arts of obstetrics from Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and also in the National University of Ireland. And she is currently working on her postgraduate papers in surgery under RCSI, which also actively involved in mass casualties and disaster management workshop throughout Malaysia. So now, first we will interview Arif about the app-based transport work. As we know, app-based transport drivers has a big risk of the COVID-19 virus spread from the passengers. So the health and safety is at risk. Another issue is due to in Malaysia we call it MCO. In Indonesia we call it PSBB. People are suggested to stay at home, and the volume of passengers also will be lower. So I would like to ask what has been the particular effect of the COVID-19 crisis on app-based transport driver? Please, Brother Arif.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kuwadana. Well, thank you to Refsa as well for inviting me for the conference. Well, basically, when we define this crisis of COVID-19 as world pandemic which has been affected to human being currently, we wish to stress these three main elements by transportation apps industry by. The first is the lockdown by the government, which is better for people, but not good from the economic perspective. We would like to stress this out due to Malaysia currently totally feels the impact of this pandemic crisis for almost 25% workers losing their jobs. Secondly, it's basically a game changer. So apps-based company for e-hailing currently switch their game plan into delivery mode. Hence, more people's locked down in their house as per regulated ordinance. So the implication we can see, more Grab driver in Malaysia have to switch their work from ferrying passengers into delivery methods such as delivery products or even delivery food for that matter. And we're looking at the supply and demand. Currently are overloaded by supply into this industry, which there is no appropriate control measure by the apps e-hailing company to control on the supply of demand at certain locations. This will cause of supply over demand rather than control through their system base. Well, basically, what else we can say is definitely it can be a good thing to the drivers, whereby they have more jobs on delivery and so on. However, in terms of transporting people, it has been reduced, I would say, up to until only 25% of people are using the Grab transportation. But after the EMCO recently, so basically we can see the increase of people that are using the apps, the Grab for the transportation to their work and so on. However, these three criteria is the main elements that we are looking into. Go ahead, Dr. Kun.
Okay, thank you, Brother Arif. The next questions, we are also curious. In the first session, we heard that the solidarity among workers and how to organize the workers into labor unions. So we know that it is not easy to form the association or from the unions, the organization that can make a unity to the workers, especially in these gig workers. So maybe can you highlight before GDMA is created, how you can successfully create or establish this GDMA?
Well, basically, when we first started, during 2015, I would say more or less early 2015. So there is this called alpha drivers, where Grab introduced to the drivers who introduce new drivers, they will get some commission or referral commission. So what I did was I organized a weekly meeting for new and current drivers. It was done every Monday night around 9 p.m. or so that we can share information, because that time it was not, it's totally illegal, I would say. Okay, the part of we don't have proper e-hailing regulations, there is no proper act that protect us as the e-hailing drivers and so on. So we do a weekly meeting for drivers where we share our information, and also we take care among ourselves. So basically in terms of information of roadblocks or any fake bookings and so on, whereby we know authorities are catching all these drivers that that time was doing it illegally. And from there up to 2017, we try to talk to the company, to the Grab management team and so on. So we try to coordinate more collaboration on how we can improve in terms of the system, in terms of the apps, in terms of how do rider rate the driver and vice versa. And also we are looking at what we can do to help each other. It's not about only the drivers, it's also about the riders and also the company as the e-hailing operators. So when 2017, we suggest one conference that called as Grab Town Hall in 2017. So we collaborate with the management team and to organize an event for the drivers. So they invited 200 drivers around Klang Valley that time. And that time I see an opportunity where I can launch the association. That was a very good time, was a valid time before I do it officially. Before that, it was like, we in a gray area, we don't know where we should go, and we also not sure what kind of support we're going to get from the drivers or even from the company. But that time I have a chance to meet Mr. Sean Goh, the head of Grab Malaysia at that time. So we said, why don't we do something that when we had back then TN50, which is a kind of a town hall conference where the government did meet the people of Malaysia. But when we talk about Grab drivers, so we did the Grab Town Hall in 2017. The same day, we also launched our association, which is also known as GDMA, Grab Drivers Malaysia Association. And yeah, by now we don't have much, but at least we have about 500 members and increasing every single day, every single month and so on, supporting our effort on how we could organize a proper association by protecting our benefits and also our people, our workers, and how we can increase from not established as e-hailing workers. Now we just like e-hailing partners or drivers. That's what we call. Now that is our current status. So we hope that in future, by having this association, by having this collaboration, and currently we have our new union, that's the e-hailing union of Malaysia. And we are seeing that we are looking forward towards having the e-hailing workers status in the e-hailing industry. That is the objective we are going through in the future, maybe now and in future, inshallah.
Yeah. So now you have 500 members. May I know how many estimation, how many workers in Grab in Malaysia?
Well, currently, as per the statistics given by the government itself, now the body that is APAD, Agensi Pengangkutan Awam Darat, they give the numbers is around about 92,000 active e-hailing drivers so far. We are not talking about the P-hailing, where it's basically on delivery services on motorbikes. So for the e-hailing drivers, roughly we have about around 90 to 100,000 drivers. That's on and off and so on. Well, basically that's the figure that we have it. That's the latest statistics that we got from the agency.
And do you communicate also with the Grab drivers in Indonesia or in other countries? Because, for example, like in Indonesia, we also have a similar organization like yours. Do you also making a network throughout maybe the ASEAN countries?
Okay, so basically, I would say our international network accountant came from as far as from UK, from London. Okay, there is this one guy. I hardly remember his name actually, but I know he's doing this union for e-hailing workers for the whole world, for the international. So basically, as regards to Indonesia, we still have no proper contact of any association in Indonesia as represent Grab Indonesia. And by far, we still have not been collaborating with any international body or NGO regarding the same industry. So maybe in future, by this conference, we should be getting more interest or demand, or maybe they will come to us, or we go to them, and we'll see how we can use this network so that we can have a proper what do you call this arrangement, or even how any country for that matter can be standardized on operations, and also especially on, we are talking about fare that we're getting, whether it's a fair fare that they're getting from the company or not. So yeah, inshallah, maybe in future we are looking forward towards collaborating with the association from Grab Indonesia, inshallah.
That's good. Yeah, and in the first session, also there is a question about the union management relation. So, in your perspective, is it the relation is good today, or maybe they have some you have some dynamics, yeah? And also, how is the relation with the government? And you also have the experience in giving a recommendation to the government. We want to know what kind of recommendation, which means what kind of interest of your organization that can be given to the government. I think this is a good success story, and we can learn from your success on this, please.
Okay, thank you for the question, Dr. Kun. So when we already established in 2017, that time the body was called as SPAD. It's now called as APAD. So from commission, or in Malay it's called Suruhanjaya, Pengangkutan Awam Darat. So from commission they were downgrade to agency. However, we start to collaborate with the SPAD and discuss with the agency on how the requirement can be more or less easier than previously. We are talking about the vehicle inspection, we are talking about medical examination on the drivers in order for them to get their PSV license or passenger vehicle license, and also the requirement for the vehicle. So last time, one of the negotiations that we did with the SPAD was they were putting that all vehicle must be 7 years and below. So the vehicle cannot be more than 7 years old. So what we did was at least give us 10 years, because you know cars is not cheap. Vehicle is not like you buy fish in the market, you know. So it's expensive. Not everyone can afford to have a newer car to do the service, because we are looking at last time it was like it's more on ride sharing. You know, people are sharing the same concept. They share their car so that they can get some money or petrol money, that kind of thing. But now when it become into industry, it's become more serious. So we are looking at that how much the driver could save. So at least the car vehicle should be minimum of up to 10 years. Means you can use for the Grab services or the e-hailing services up to 10 years instead of 7 years. And we are also looking about how we can do the PSV courses, doing it online. Instead of the driver have to come for the class, they have to, you know, take their leave and so on. So the government have like helping us a lot in a way of giving, instead of we have to go every 6 months inspection, for that matter, vehicle inspection, we have our Puspakom body as the body to do the vehicle inspection. Instead of every 6 months, so we get it like every once a year. So for the cars that is going to their 3rd year of service, they need to do for their Puspakom inspection or vehicle inspection. So this has been increased from every 6 months up to 1 year. Okay, so this is a good thing when they try when they implement the e-hailing act in 2017. All right. Other than that, we are also talking about how the government could control the pricing, the fair pricing. So basically, we are looking at some application or some e-hailing operators are giving a very minimum wage for the driver. It's a very low fare, and it is totally not fair for the drivers. So when they introduced an open market concept for e-hailing, what happened was some new companies tried to tap. Okay, this is a very big cake. The e-hailing industry, we all agree, is a very big cake. So what they did was they tried to put as low as 3 ringgit. That is what less than $1 per trip for a 5-kilometer trip. That's ridiculous. That's totally out of the question already. So at least what we did was we tried to negotiate with the Grab management, because we can't negotiate with the government because the government is not controlling on the fair price. So what Grab did was they implement a minimum of 5 ringgit per trip. We are talking about roughly below 5-kilometer trip. So a driver will get a minimum of 5 ringgit fare. For us, it's fair enough. It's fair enough because we also want the customer to enjoy. This is a very good rate. However, it's still higher than the taxi. So it's a way of alternative. So when you are talking about dynamic fare that the Grab have implemented by many years, so we can see when there is a traffic jam, when there's peak hours and so on. So the price increase dynamically by maybe from 15 to 25% from the current fare. So this is a very good thing as well, so that the drivers doesn't have to drive a very longer hours for a very little fare. I mean, like the fare is less if you compare on the current rate. And however, we are looking forward. Okay, the control from the government should be putting to all the new e-hailing operators. If they want to do the e-hailing business, they must have a minimum fare for all application. We are talking around maybe 5 or 7 ringgit fare minimum. We are talking about that kind of range, and we are talking also about from 1 ringgit 30 cents to 1 ringgit 80 cents per kilometer. Not less than that. The current market is around 75 cents to 1 ringgit 10 cents. That kind of price, it's really killing the drivers. So slowly, by this association and by also our union collaboration, and maybe we can also talk in Grab Indonesia in the future, what we did was we worked closely with all the bodies. We are talking about APAD, we are talking about JPJ, we are talking about Puspakom, and also we are talking about MOT, the Ministry of Transport in Malaysia, to accommodate the driver's benefit. So every decision should be a win-win-win situation. Means it's also good for the drivers, it's also good for the riders, and also for the e-hailing company. Go ahead, Dr. Gun.
Yeah, it's very good experience. Yeah, so your voice is heard by the social partners, the employers, as well as the government. So I think, yeah, it's quite interesting. And one other things is about the occupational safety and health. Yeah, because currently in the COVID-19 pandemic, maybe is there any incident, for example, like the Grab drivers that has been affected because of this virus spread? Also, if you think there is another risk, especially on the safety and health of the drivers, and then after that, maybe you raise this to the employers, and then the employers want to give the benefit to you. Is there any experience like that?
Okay. Basically, when we look about safety issues or even health issues, since we already, facing the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, so let's talk about the safety of the drivers when they are, when they are working, when they are driving, when they are online. We have seen a few cases. Even drivers are killed by the rider. This is a very serious issue. And other crime activities that has been involving the Grab drivers. This is a very sad story. In a few years, I've been since 2015. There's a few cases, but I would say it's a very rare cases. It's not like you will see this every day or every month or every year. Well, maybe every year, but not every single day of our life. So there's a case that driver was murdered. Yes, this is a serious thing, murdered by the rider. So they just download the app and they book a driver, and something bad happened to the driver. I don't know what to say, but I know the person that in the circle. Okay, one of the drivers is one of my recruited drivers. So he shared what happened to his in-law brother, younger brother. So it's not that far though. So we are talking about how company as Grab can really focus on ensuring the safety of the drivers. So we are talking to the government as well on why not all these individual. So doesn't matter. It can be a Malaysian, it can be a foreigners. When they come into Malaysia, when they want to use the Grab app, there must be a guideline of how the apps will recognize the individual that want to register into the app and to use the app. We are talking about, submitting their original passport or even permits or ID cards, and they have to take a selfie for that matter, so that when, as a normal person, when you submit all your private, your personal details, so basically that the tendency of doing a crime will be reduced, I would say. We are not talking about, we're not neglecting that. No, if people want to do a crime, whatever reason is, they will still do it, fine. However, by having this proper documentation by the passenger or by the rider or by the user that wanted, same as driver. We as driver, we have to provide our ID card or our IC, identity card. We have to provide our car license. We have to provide our PSV license, our car insurance, our car registration card, and so on. You name it, whatever, our medical report. So everything for the drivers is complied by all the e-hailing drivers. We follow whatever the guideline given by the government. However, one big question I would like to ask, why was the same thing not implemented to the riders that want to use the application? So, because we are talking about safety. The driver have the right to know who they are picking up, who they are going to deliver, or what kind of product, or what kind who is they are going to what I mean is working with. It's basically we need to know, okay, from who's the people that we're going to take their delivery item, their parcel, their documents, or even the person that we are carrying in our car every single day. We are carrying almost strangers every single day by not knowing where they are from actually, and who they are and so on. But the company should know, the government should know, okay, people who are using the app, so that if anything happen, regardless, vice versa, whether to the riders or even to the passenger, I'm not saying that not only riders are doing the crime. There's also cases that drivers are doing the same thing. Talking about, even sexual harassment and so on, fake reporting in terms of, one case that I would like to share. One rider complained to Grab saying that the driver had been doing sexual harassment. But the actual thing happened was, this passenger was moving her hijab Okay, we also not sure why she's doing that in the car. So the driver glanced a bit through his rear mirror, and and the trip was completed. The driver sent the customer and so on. But what happened was he was complained by doing sexual harassment, and his account was banned, was suspended and permanently banned, and he are not able to do the work anymore. This is a very serious thing. So what I advise the driver is to do a cover report in the police station. So he went to the PDRM, our police, Royal Police, so to make a report, cover report, saying what actually happened in the car during the transit. So, but the rider did not do anything. There was no proper report or the police report from the rider. So what happened was, Alhamdulillah, the driver get back online. He can, do his work as usual. And I was like very furious and also curious. Why is this happening? Why does a passenger do a fake report, a false complaint on a driver who are really doing his work well, serving the customer, giving what a passenger should get by the amount that he or she is paying to the driver? So this is a big question. We're talking about safety, and we're talking about health. So a lot of effort has been done by Grab. Thank you to Grab Management Malaysia, whereby they supply with the sanitizer, with face mask, and then giving the SOP and so on. Keep on giving notification through driver's app, to adhere to our SOP, to take care and to make sure the rider also wear their mask. But sometimes there's cases where passenger does not wear mask and come and go into our car, into our vehicle. So this is a very sad story when this is happening. So basically we are talking about health issue now.
Yes,
so
correct.
whether it can become a Grab driver cluster, so it's like,
thank you.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, it's very clear. Yeah, so also it's very clear that it shows also that the employer also hear your voice, hear the GDMA.
Yes.
And then like you mentioned, a win-win solution. The protection of the workers also can be done in this matter. So thank you, Brother Arif. Because of time, I need to shift to Dr. Rubini. After that, we will come back to you again. So thank you so much, Brother Arif.
Most welcome, Dr. Kun. Most welcome.
Dr. Rubini. In the current situation, we know also there are a lot of victims of the medical workers due to the impact of COVID-19. So in Dr. Rubini's presentation, she will talk about the biggest challenge of medical workers throughout the COVID-19 crisis, and also the support from the state that hopefully can be done to help the frontline workers. And also there is a shift in the role and risk profile of the medical workers post COVID-19. So without any further ado, we would like to invite Dr. Rubini, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kun. I think it's been a really long day with many insights from people from different backgrounds in the session today. Thank you everyone for staying on. I think mine is the last one, so just bear with me. I'll just share my screen first. Okay, all right. So this will be focusing on medical work as part of the entire conference, which I think I understand it's very much economical based, which has given me a great insight on what things are like on the other side, because my work has been mostly in the hospital, and obviously I understand that the burden towards the economy has been great, the impact has also been very much as we are facing in the hospitals, it's also very bad in the economy as well. But to actually hear it from different perspectives, from different people, it's been very, very insightful. So what I covered today, the outline would basically revolve mostly around my medical work, because I think everyone understands that we are frontliners, we are the medical workers treating the patients, but I think everyone understands that, we are burnt out and stuff like that, but I'd like to take you through an insight of what we do and then go through the basis of what has already been mentioned by Dr. Kun earlier. So I'd speak about my day-to-day life. What are the challenges that we face as medical workers in the entire healthcare industry, which I think is the epitome of the current pandemic as of now, and the support that we are getting, not just from the state, but I also think from everyone else around us, and also what would be the post-pandemic repercussions that would be faced eventually, which at this point I think we are also not sure of when that would be. So to start it off, what's it like a day in my life? So, well, prior to COVID, what it was like, it was just a regular day at work. We wake up, we go, we see patients, we've got clinics, we've got, the healthcare in Malaysia is really good in the sense that we do see a large number of patients in clinics and stuff like that. We also have meetings where we go through all the statistics, and we have conferences, and also we have out of work activities, for example, like family days and gala nights and stuff like that. So that would be prior to COVID-19, which I think most of us would have that on a day-to-day basis. But what happens during COVID is that there has been, since the rise of the pandemic, there's been a great barrier, I would say, especially between the doctor-patient relationship, where we go to work with a shield that stands between a patient and myself. And that happens not just when we're seeing patients, but also in terms of the volume of our clinic has reduced tremendously, because it's come to a point where we are actually we have to screen through patients to not see those who are actually not in a very critical phase. For example, cancer patients who are, we only tend to see cancer patients who are actually, if at all we don't see them and we were to postpone their date to a later date, that would actually mean that their disease will progress. So that has also greatly impacted non-COVID illnesses, I'd say, because everyone has been focusing on what the pandemic is essentially. And also besides that, like meetings are cancelled, conferences are cancelled, all of this so as to reduce social distancing and also to reduce the number of people in small crowded places and stuff like that. So we have actually been focused very much on the pandemic itself and everything else. I mean, healthcare is a large spectrum, as we have discussed in the gig economy. It encompasses a wide variety of things that's done. And likewise, it is like in healthcare, it's not just about treating patients. We also have health updates and things like that, which we are not able to do as well. And then working in a full personal protective equipment, as I mentioned earlier, it's like a shield between a patient and ourselves as well. Like, it's not just what we wear. We've got a mask, we've got a cap, an apron, then we've got the full suit. It's exactly like what you've been seeing everywhere else that it is. And then there's frequent sanitization that comes into play, as it was before, but now it involves more thorough sanitization because of the rate of infectivity of the pandemic. And then attending to acute problems. So it's not just, you don't just see a patient once a day, right? You see the patients repeatedly, especially if they've got acute problems where we have to, when we've removed the entire suit, we have sanitized, and then something happens and we have to go in back again. So it can become a very tedious process, because it's not just like, oh, the patient's out of breath and I go and attend the patient to immediately, but the process of me attending the patient requires another full set of things that I have to do prior to attending the patient. And then not just that, we don't just deal with patients. Obviously, there's statistics as well of those active cases, and then which is subdivided into further classes of patients who are stable, unstable, and then the ones who are deceased, and all of that encompasses as part of our jobs as well. And finally, to keep up with changes, as we know, the pandemic, from the initial wave to the current wave, the second wave right now, a lot of things have evolved. People have been trying to come up with vaccines. There have been cases of reinfection. And, there's a lot of things that revolves around the existence of the virus as well, which is very poorly understood as of now. So this is where actually a lot of people just out of the healthcare industry have been looking into, like research workers. And I think since this is a global situation, we have been informed, and we have to keep up to date on what are the possible treatments and how to actually, attend to things like this accordingly as things are dynamic in this situation. So subsequently, the biggest challenges that I would say based on what I do on a day-to-day basis would be, like I've mentioned earlier, a doctor-patient barrier. When we put on our full PPE, I think it's really sad that most patients can't see our faces. And I think it's very important. Like when you meet someone, it's just a very, it's common courtesy. You smile, you greet, but that is completely demolished with the existence of a pandemic. And I'm not just talking about when you're dealing with a COVID-19 patient, but there's a fear that even when you're dealing with a regular patient that they might actually have it. So it's completely demolished. And you know, the rapport that we have to build trust with the patient, I think that is a very, very big problem. But I think it's coming to a point where wearing a mask and, you know, not being actually able to see people's facial expressions is becoming a culture where I think it's also the way we impart our intonation when we speak to patients. I think that's where we are able to build our trust and rapport in these times. Next would be progression of non-COVID illnesses. As I mentioned earlier, clinic cases are postponed, elective surgeries are postponed, all of which because we are actually, we would like to maintain the capacity of the hospital to serve for what is a bigger issue now. So I think it's really sad that patients who are non-COVID related, for example, terminal illnesses and non-communicable diseases like diabetes and hypertension and all of that, they are all left to lay low for a while. And even with that, we see that patients, most of the time, you know, patients are not kept followed up, and we try to make phone calls to check with them. But I think, like I said, it goes back to the doctor-patient barrier where we are not able to see them face to face. There's no that personal touch to actually attend to our patients. It's how we would back then when things were normal. So the next would be limited resources. I think this happens everywhere, basically because like we've discussed earlier, there's a shock in demand and the requirement for a simultaneous supply, which has brought to the limitation of resources. And I think in terms of healthcare, we are talking about, you know, the capacity of beds, the availability of, oxygen supplementation, ventilations, and things like that. I think this is a common issue that's being faced everywhere, but it's being looked into by the government as a now and when. And, you know, from the first wave to the second wave, I think it's being attended to more. There's a faster response in actually providing the resources and things like that in terms of challenges. Next would be manpower. I think we are stretched everywhere when it comes to manpower, but it's good that we have got a large reservoir. For example, I would speak on behalf, obviously, of my own country, in Malaysia. We have got East and West Malaysia, so we have got a good group on both sides. It's just that sadly on West Malaysia where I'm working, there's more of rural areas where the density of manpower is not as much, but thankfully all these rural areas are very much far from the areas that are affected, so it's actually kind of kept away. But we could still mobilize within hospitals. That would be the first stage, and subsequently would be with the interstate. For example, in our case, would be between East and West Malaysia to mobilize. As we all know now, I think Sabah is being very, very badly hit. So we are mobilizing healthcare workers from West Malaysia, which will not just be doctors. I mean, yes, we are the ones that attend to patient at the front line, but I'm talking about like medical assistants, staff nurses, sisters, research assistants, everyone. It's a team. It's a team. I mean, yes, I am treating the patients, but what happens behind? There's no point when you're treating the patients, but you're not looking at point of prevention, point of recovery, which is where all the research assistants, the vaccine, and all of that come into place. So next would be lack of public health education. I think it's a really, really big issue, which I'll address in detail later. But many people don't understand the importance of a simple mask. You know, like what Arif mentioned earlier. It could be as simple as a patient coming into the car, but the mask is not on the face. Like they do not understand the gravity of the situation. They don't understand that being in an enclosed space. And it's sad because for a regular Grab driver, they are dealing with so many different types of people on a day-to-day basis. So people don't understand. And when you talk about curing patients, obviously it starts with prevention of it. So if at the level of the community, at the level of the primary public, things are not being addressed. And why is that so? It's because they do not understand how it works, and they do not tend to know the gravity towards the economy, towards the healthcare workers. And I think this is the largest drawback in terms of the whole pandemic going out of hand. It starts at the front. So we are not the frontliners, actually. And the public is the frontliners, because it starts there and then it comes on to us when things go out of hand. All right, so next would be a work-life balance. So obviously we are the blue collar workers where we have to be on site. There's no such thing as working from home or, doing things behind the curtains and stuff like that. We are at the forefront. So obviously now the volume of our work would be increased because of the entire, the pandemic and the volume of patients and things like that. So there is, to a certain degree, of work-life imbalance that's established, but I think it comes to a point where it's part of our work. Like at this point in time, it's our duty and our responsibility to actually attend to it as well. So how is the state supporting the crisis? Like the highest impact that has been provided by the state. I mean, I'm really thankful that it's all being addressed accordingly, maybe not in a very timely manner, but it's being captured and addressed accordingly one by one. I mean, obviously it's not a one-man kind of show. It's a multi-level, it's a multi-level thing that has to be done before it's executed at the end point. So like I said, we've been being provided by psychological first aid by the in-house psychiatry team, where they actually have, they design questionnaires and they check on you daily, make sure that you're doing fine. They provide a platform for you to actually voice out your, like how you feel about the situations, any dissatisfaction and things like that. And I think it's very important because, there's no point in just ranting on social media, on like Facebook. Yes, it gets a lot of attention, but not in the right way, because that would just create a mayhem and a chaos, and people don't understand how things goes on inside. So obviously the ones who would be able to handle it better is the ones who are inside, who are within the community of things that's being done. And subsequently would be continuous medical education. I'm so glad that we're actually getting a lot of help from consultants and consultants of infectious disease, not just within Malaysia, but also from different part of the world, especially China, which is very enlightening. I think Malaysia has got a very good relationship with China, whereby they're actually coming up with vaccines. So, and they have actually prioritized Malaysia to be the recipients of us. And also there's also been, in view of the second wave, there's also been cases of reinfection where, they're looking for donors. So like patients with, the publics who have actually been infected with COVID-19 to actually, and have recovered from it, to actually volunteer, to not just speak about their experience, but also to actually provide their blood sample to be analyzed to see that, if there's any form of antibodies that could be picked up as a form of treatment later on in the future. So I think this is where the public can come into play, and a certain amount of a cash is given to them to appreciate, and also besides the empathy purpose, to appreciate that what they have gone through basically as part of the pandemic. And then providing resources, I mentioned earlier, obviously it doesn't happen immediately, but in a timely manner of things that's being done. And sometimes it's limited for different reasons. Like like in Malaysia, the epicenter of things usually happens in the west of Malaysia. So being in the east of Malaysia, things take time to actually come here and stuff like that. But as of now, I think it's being done in a timely but acceptable manner, where we're actually able to cope with things as the way it's happening. So next would be reallocation and distribution of healthcare workers. I think I've touched on this as well earlier in terms of the mobilization. So it's basically redistribution of healthcare workers. So now it doesn't matter if they are in a different, for example, if they're an eye doctor or a ear doctor, like now it's a pandemic. So everyone is a COVID doctor. It doesn't matter just like how I'm surgical, but at this point in time, we need the form of manpower. So I think as sad as it is that we are not able to attend to what we're actually passionate about and things that we do, but I think at this point, obviously the country needs this for different reasons, because everyone wants to go back to being normal, right? Like no one wants to wear a mask all the time. It's not as comfortable. I mean, I'm sure we can all agree on that. So next would be primary education. So I'd like to touch on this because this is like an app-based thing, which I think is a really good initiative that has been done, and this is what's being done in Malaysia, and I understand that it's also being done in other countries, obviously, of a different app base and stuff like that. So I think this would encompass to a certain degree of gig economy because it comes into place of app designers and, you know, to look into what goes into the app and things like that. Because, I mean, that's not, we're at the forefront, but I think things like this would actually help us because this would be to educate the public. So I just like to go through the app. So this is the main logo of the app. So when you open the app, it comes up like, so if, as you can see here, it's the, so there's the risk status. So that would assess the, based on the patient's biography, as well as their profile, their location, it would actually assess their risk, right? And then it shows their hotspot of where they are, their location based on their geographical location, you know, if it's a dangerous area to be in or not, and kind of things like that. And then you've got digital health, which I'll look into further later. And you've got health facilities, the nearby health facilities that the patients can actually go to if they have any concerns. All right. And then besides that, you also have the thing where it's addressed the latest updates on COVID. So in terms of the statistics and things like that. So if you were to click more, it takes you here. So you've got your update, your risk status, because like I said, it's a dynamic situation, it's constantly changing. You've got your hotspot tracker, you've got manage your dependents, so you can even put your dependents in the app as well. And then your health screening facilities, so your digital healthcare, which I'll go into more as well, additional resources, standard operating procedures. Like we know we've got, like in Malaysia, we've got the movement control order, which is done in different ones. We've got EMCO, which is standard, RMCO, which is restricted, and we also have CMCO, which is conditional. So what's the difference? So here is where it addresses the different kind of movement control orders, you know, because some people don't understand exactly how, what's the difference, you know, can I still get married? Can I still get my shop open? You know, is it affecting me? Is it not affecting me? Is my business an essential service that I can still open or not? So this can be addressed through the app as well, which is really, really useful because sometimes when you want to call out the government, they are swamped with different issues. And I don't think, you know, and having this kind of app actually helps to give the public an insight of what is actually going on. And then also the frequently asked questions. So if you were to click into digital healthcare, which I'd like to look into more, you would have your virtual health advisory as well as a clinic appointment booking. So your virtual health advisory is where you go into, for example, an app. It's a collaboration between the Ministry of Health Malaysia as well as this app, which is Doc2Us, which goes into an interface like this. So it gives you the statistics as well. And then you've got your free COVID-19 virtual health advisory portal. So you can ask a doctor, get a prescription. So this would mean that you have like a virtual consultation, which essentially puts you at a lower risk of exposure with, you know, you don't necessarily have to go out there and see a doctor in person to actually know, which would essentially reduce our burden as well, because certain things can actually be addressed at the primary level. And with this, you also reduce exposure of the public to a high risk area, because obviously when you're walking into the hospital, that itself puts you at a risk of exposure, whether directly or indirectly. So this is a really good initiative by, that has been done within Malaysia, within the app, which is also being done in different countries, but I think based on different interfaces. So next would be the local health screening, which can be done by QMed, UncoMed, BookDoc, where you can actually see local health facilities nearby that actually provide screening purposes for the COVID-19. So, you know, if they have concerns or, you know, for whatever reason that they have concerns about, you know, they're worried about exposure in their workplace, or, you know, they visited a friend who came back from a high-risk area, then they can choose to do this as well, where you can also assess your risk and then book your appointment accordingly, and everything will be done through the app. All right, and then you also have your COVID-19 update. So your active total number of cases and, you know, recovered, and then you see it covers over the states as well, and also the global update. So this here. And then you also have your checking in, so you can actually assess your risk and keep track of where you've been. So in case that there have been a positive case and where you've been, then it would pop up and say that whether or not you should be screened or not. So this is a really good app, and I think that it's so comprehensive, it's so thorough, and I think I'm able to go into this because I have a Malaysian identity. But as far as I'm concerned, it's being done in a lot of other countries as well. Like in Germany, they've got COVID tracker, they've got COVID safe, different interfaces, but I think essentially it covers more or less the same thing. So next would be coming on to the last topic. So what happens after this? But although we don't know when the after this is going to be like, but I think on a very large scale, to a certain extent, I think we should feel, well, I wouldn't say gifted. I think it's a blessing in disguise eventually that's going to come out of this, because, you know, we've got the rise of gig economy from 500,000 to 2.8 million. I mean, what are the odds? I think it's a really good platform, obviously. And I think through this conference, we're establishing a very good social security profile for everyone on this economy. So I think in a way, it's a game changer. It's something that we needed to happen in 2020, like in the 20th century, for everyone to be pushed, because even in terms of reaching the internet, like you see the app, the access towards all these apps, and even the gig economy, everything relies on the internet. So most of them, especially in the rural area of, you know, not having the necessity to access to internet, would now eventually somehow find a way to access to the internet. So it increases the global outreach of everything. So, you know, as much as they say the only way to grow is to actually go out of your comfort zone. So I think to a certain extent, although at this point we are all out of our comfort zone, but eventually later, after the whole pandemic ends, we'll see that I think instead of, you know, to a certain extent, yeah, it has costed us a lot of lives, a lot of loss, and, you know, but we will definitely get out of it. And there definitely be greater awareness regarding infectious diseases. Like, you know, now it's a culture. Wearing a mask is a culture. Going out with a hand sanitizer in your bag is a culture. So I think it would actually not just reduce the rates of COVID per se, but every form of infectious disease. For example, in a third world countries, we've got tuberculosis, we've got HIV, we've got AIDS, things like that. All of that revolves around sanitation and being careful of your exposure. So I think in a way, it's definitely a blessing in disguise, and also enhance global vigilance in terms of cross-country traveling, like different form of epidemic in different countries, how to be more careful. People would just generally be more careful and vigilant about everything that they do now. Every step, holding a doorknob, opening a doorknob, going to a mall, coming back, you know, as small, simple things like that would be given attention to, which I think to a certain extent, it would be a good move. And I think healthcare workers become more resilient, and not just healthcare workers. I think everyone who's been affected by this whole pandemic, be it gig workers and healthcare workers, anyone, we'd come out stronger. We'd be more open to ideas of how things can be done differently, how to actually cope with all these constantly changing and dynamic times, of how to adapt, how to cope with all these tough times and things like that. So I think rather than, I mean, obviously we'd be very much a better person in terms of our immune response will be much greater, but I think physically and mentally we'd come out of this as better people in terms of healthcare workers. And this hopefully would instill passion amongst younger generations to understand that when it comes to medical work, it's not just about being a doctor. It's not just about being a nurse. I mean, like, I think at this point, it's to say that, oh yay, I've lived through a pandemic and I've came out alive. And you know, there's so many things, there's so many paradigm to medical work. It's not just about being a doctor. I could even become a research. I could design a vaccine. I could save the world. You know, so I think when it comes to a certain extent that there is a lot of things that might actually come out of this in a very good way. So I'm actually I might have a very different view compared to because like, yeah, mine revolves mostly around the academic, but I think this is my 2 cents on the whole event of it being a medical work in the future of work, new normal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rubini, for your comprehensive presentation. It's very interesting. Because of time, now I open the question and answer session. But when I look at the list of the questions, so far there is no questions yet.
Maybe Dr. Kun, I could add up some of the what we were supposed to discuss today.
Okay.
And I would like to refer. I know it's a prepared question. And how do gig workers organize? You know, as we know, the gig definition is for short-term works or last-minute options that workers have to be able to do it in their lives. You know, the main key component for people is a survival in their lives. So we can see in the trend of these 5 years, people come and go doing Grab. When they have a proper work, when they have a better job, so they will leave eventually from driving Grab to their proper work or proper job. And maybe it's also from full-time drivers, when they have when they got a job, so they will do it part-timely to maybe increase their income, whole household income, you know, that kind of thing. And My second point is to look into this gig economy could help the workers from bigger perspective, okay? Not just rather for short-term basis, but unfortunately, many business just focusing on gig economy for the short terms instead of looking the wide variety nature of business. For example, why can't bigger companies to collaborate each other to make it this gig more exciting for betterment of this industry? You know, why don't Lazada or Shopee to collaborate with Grab for delivering their items rather than just focusing on their mainstream business of sales and marketing segment? This would help focusing on stability of the supply over demand crisis for the workers. And for the third question, I think will be the last question. And I would like to describe this into two segments, which is before and current challenge faced by the gig workers. So point number one, they hook by crook. The gig workers must face this challenging situation for own survival. Okay, operationally, for the e-hailing company, it seems not impacted on this current COVID situation. Okay, workers has more option to join at any gig company during this juncture. Prior to before this situation, workers are more focused on the priority life instead of the basic needs. Okay, and the point number two, we can't expect people to change their life drastically. You know, with this new normal of work style, people have to absorb the situation, whether they like it or not. You know, gig economy grow rapidly during this phenomenon pandemic. A short period work styles may help to make sure survival in place. Now, billions of people in the world struggling to ensure their life. We may put a lot of hope and pray for the better life for the near future, and the stability of economics will prosper back for the people and especially for the gig workers. And I would like to send my gratitude for the invitation by the organizer to obtain myself feedback and suggestions and to expel more current pandemic COVID, how impacted to our lives and household income generally. Thank you, Dr. Kun. That's all. I think that's all about me.
Thank you, Brother Arif. Yeah. So due to the time, I think I will end our session. So many thanks for Brother Arif. Many thanks to Dr. Rubini for your excellent presentation. A lot of inspiration. And yeah, I would like to wrap up this session by saying that from the perspective of the app-based transport services, as discussed with Brother Arif, the stronger the voice, also because the unit nice, that's why the voice can be heard by employers and also the government. And from Dr. Rubini, can conclude that the healthcare sector also need to be adjusted to the environment. Also, the government should support the medical workers, such as psychological first aid, medical education, providing resources, and also reallocation and distribution of healthcare workers. And also, Dr. Rubini mentioned about the apps. Yeah, we believe also there will be a gig workers from the medical healthcare sector, because those doctors that will answer all the questions through the apps also will be maybe in the future classified as the gig workers. So by this, I will end our session, and I will pass to Brother Frederick. Is it?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gug, and thank you to the Dr. Rubini and Brother Arif for that session. That was also extremely interesting. I think that concludes the formal parts of day 3 of this conference as well. So thanks very much again to everyone. I think we had a very comprehensive view at the gig economy, both from a more policy and regulatory perspective, as well as the on-the-ground reality, which we really need both perspectives to be well informed about it. So this concludes the session today. Tomorrow we have day 4, which looks at the impact on youth primarily. So that also promises to be a very interesting session. If you want to see more about that, there is the link in the chat. So also with which directs to refsa.org. where you will find the full details and also a link to sign up to the session tomorrow. So please do so. I'm sure it will be worth your while. So as I mentioned, it concludes the formal part of the day. So obviously the panelists have been here for a long time. They may have to attend to other things, so they are obviously free to go. What we will try and do, however, is for those in the audience and on the panel that may want to stay on a bit further and exchange views, opinions, ideas, questions, etc. We will open the session to everyone, and the way we will do that is if you use the raise hand feature, which you will find at the bottom of the Zoom software. If you want to stay on and exchange views, etc., with your fellow attendees, then please click that button, and we will promote you to a panelist. And then you are free to switch on video and speak to everyone else in the audience. So I will just wrap up here, and then just remind everyone to click that raise hand button if you want to exchange views and participate further. And I hope to see everyone tomorrow as well on day 4. Thank you very much again, and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kun.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Sergio. Yeah.
It's challenging to be in the last session, but I think it was still very much catching attention of the participants after such a long day.
Yes, yes. I'm sorry for the late of time. Yeah. But actually, it is very good interview. Yeah, I think this inspired us for the people in Indonesia as well. Yeah, we learned a lot from this session.
Glad to hear that. I think it was a nice add-on to what you have done in 2018 in Jakarta in your interview with a Gojek driver.
Right.
And the combination of medical education for Grab users as well as patients in the hospital, I think was also interesting. It shows that in all situations of life now, we need more attention to the medical requirements.
Yes, correct. And yeah, like you mentioned that the personal health or health personalization is a trend. People now more care about their personal health. So many people download these apps and they can consult with the medical doctor interactively through the apps. So that's why many doctors maybe in the future they will shift from face-to-face into the app-based or platform-based application. So that's why even the doctor will be the gig workers in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that is really the way we should heading for, but maybe it's unavoidable
yes.
Due to the situation.
Yes, yeah. And yeah, I think we need to also to thinking about them, because it will be the issues, it will be like long working hours, stressful, and others like similar like gig workers in other industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thought, which I haven't had actually before the talk today, that not only care workers, but even doctors could become gig workers in a way.
Yes. And one thing, Brother Sergio, now there is a trend of the mental health issues, not a physical health issues, but mentally, because of the COVID-19, people are scared, fear, and they have an anxiety. Yeah, also because of the retrenchment, dismissal, let off. So now a lot of psychological issues to the workers, to the people, and I think yeah we need also to think on how to protect them from the pressure from physically. Yeah. And also sometimes working from home, yeah, because the long working hours will be more. There is no right to disconnect, so
No right to
sometimes they
disconnect.
are. Yeah, yeah. Even the time for sleeping, they still work. So until late at night, yeah. So more and more people are physically problematic in the near future. So that's why now the unions also should think on how to protect them from mentally health problem.
Yeah, very good point. Ihan is also with us now, right?
Hello, hi. Yes, I am sorry, it was a bit delayed, but before I mention anything, I'd just like to thank everybody here for attending. It's a great session. I think even though it's a little bit long, so I thank you very much for all your attention, and Kun and Arif and Rubini, the interview was very illuminating in the sense of that you have been sharing from the ground. And the earlier session was discussing more about the overall sort of trends and observations from mainly policymakers and Jaigen as well. I think that was a good presentation. So I thought, and Sergio, if you agree with me too, we could just let everybody that are in the panelists now. You are all up promoted to a panelist. I think you can switch on your video if you would like. So if you like to do that, please go ahead. And if you can, if you would like to speak, try to unmute yourself. If you can't do that, just raise your hand or something, and we will try to, as a host, we will try to unmute you. But I think that this session, let's try to make it a bit more inclusive for everybody, including the attendees, including the participants. If you would like, or if you have anything specific that you want to share among this group, please do go ahead. So I would sort of try to leave the conversation open. You could go ahead and discuss about what you thought of the sessions, or anything that you would like to highlight to some of the remaining speakers and moderators who are still with us. So does anybody like to give it a start? Hi, Fahmi. I can't see, I'm not sure if I can see everybody. Yeah, yeah, I can see everybody. Yeah.
Hi everyone. This is Zaigan
Sure.
here. Yeah. So actually, I have a question. I think both to me, to Arif and actually Fahmi, right? I think so previously I did want to look into sort of ride hailing in Malaysia, and also maybe around the region, right? One big question that always comes in is what is the proportion of drivers who are part-time versus who are full-time, right? And I think this is a question that people keep asking, and no one seems to have an answer to it. So I want to sort of get a sense, right, from Arvin, maybe from Malaysia, from your team and your folks, you know, are most drivers, or what percentage roughly are they part-time and versus full-time? And I think because this actually impacts also how we understand, right, the drivers, and how vulnerable they are, right? Because one hand, some argue, hey, you know, these guys got their own jobs, so they are protected. So, but actually, what is that proportion there? And I think a view from Indonesia also be quite interesting if Fahmi would know. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dan, for the question. I think looking at the statistics, I mean, this is based on really personal research, you know. What I can say, we have maybe merely around 60-40 ratio, 60% who are doing full-time and 40% doing part-time. And then, well, of course, this figure will like fluctuate most of the time, because like I said previously, when they have a proper job, so they will shift. So they will no longer driving. Some may drive for a few years. I've been driving since 2015, but in this last 2 years, I'll be driving like whenever I have time. I have extra time, you know, I can get some income from driving Grab. So surely I will drive Grab. But I also seen a lot of drivers who previously they drive like 14, 12, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. And when they have a proper job, so they change. So they just work 8 hours in the office or so. Okay, and when they come back from the office, so they will drive maybe 2 to 3 hours before they heading home. So basically, I would see for the part-timers, it's a very good platform for them to earn an extra income, okay, for the household income. And for the full-time drivers, it's basically they are screaming on the fare every single day. You can look from our Facebook page, from the Facebook group, for any social media for that matter, even through WhatsApp group. They've been complaining, they've been asking why. Why is the fare is like peanuts? You know, we're supposed to eat bread, but we have to eat peanuts. You know, that kind of thing, that kind of perception by all the drivers. But this is because of the supply and demand, because of the open market that given by the government. So it's not controlled by anyone. It's basically from the supply and the demand. So we want to see improvement on this industry so that a full-time driver, especially for full-time drivers, they will earn, I would say, a very fair, good income. Currently, everyone is struggling. We also understand that the even the passenger is struggling on, you know, paying a fare for them to go to work, for them to, you know, to send their kids to the schools or anything. They use the Grab every single day. We understand this kind of this matter, but we are looking at the middle point so that everyone happy. I think this should answer question just now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Tan.
Does anybody have any other questions? Fahmi, you were about to say something?
Just briefly addressing 10 questions. It's important to know the figure, but unfortunately it's only, you know, it's difficult to get from even from the company. So only companies, or either Gojek or Grab has such a data. But from our estimation, from the, like, extrapolation that one institute of transportations has done, it's over 70% are full-time drivers. Over 70% are full-time driver. Even in 2015, when the companies attract more drivers with bonuses, with incentives, with a lot of money available for the drivers. Even many workers employed in companies or factories, they quit from the job and take that app-based driver as a full-time employment. But then it's, of course, it changed a lot now, and most of the drivers suffer from the situation now. And interestingly, it's also increasing number have shown when we research in one of the heartland of the industrial area in West Java, in Bekasi. Like in one factory, more than 30% of the workers working in that particular factory, and this is generally also happen in other factories, are taking a part-time job as a driver, mostly motorbike taxi drivers, either with the Gojek or Grab. So in a way, there are reasons why these employed workers working as part-time drivers. One, because of the meager salary. And of course, it's impacting the union and the labor unions work, because the time for the organizing, the time for union activities in that factories, in the companies, has been decreased. So that's also a challenge for the labor unions. Maybe Kun has also recent information about this. Brother Kun, please.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I don't have information. I read your paper, your publication. It's very good actually. It's very comprehensive, and actually I like your research result. Yeah. I don't have anything to add, Brother Fahmi. So thank you.
If Dr. Rubini is still with us, she was still here a second ago. I would like to ask also a question to her. So as you mentioned, our discussion is quite economy heavy. And on the first day, we had also a presentation by Jayati Ghosh, who is a renowned economist from India, who stressed that one result of this COVID crisis should be also a stronger emphasis on care work, and I would even say broader, of work that is related to empathy. That means not only care work, but also people working as teachers, kindergarten, and so on. So what is your view from your professional perspective, since we have talked a lot about disruption because of automation? You have mentioned that you might work more with digital devices, but would you also see the reverse trend, that people realize, wow, if we stay the whole day in front of monitors and only operate with machines, that is really not a nice scenario for the future. So what would be your professional take on that? Would there be any reverse positive impact for more empathy work?
Thank you so much for the question. I think definitely there will be, like I mentioned earlier during my session, that to a certain extent, all of this is a blessing in disguise. And I don't think it's just the impact it's towards the economy or even healthcare workers, but I think this whole situation, it's a global situation at a multi-level. Like you said, even if it's any other professions, be it lawyers, teachers, engineers, it's affecting everyone. In terms of empathy, obviously it comes to a point of, it's emphasized more on healthcare workers because we deal with patients, we deal with tricky, difficult situations, literally on a daily basis. So I think the reverse positive effect would be that, how to actually, for example, as something that might sound very simple, like breaking a bad news with a full personal protective equipment. So I think previously we used to focus so much on our facial expressions and stuff, but now we have to focus on our intonation. So I think when it comes to empathy for care workers, it is really a very, very important element because the mode of delivery is different now. It's not the same way on how we used to say things earlier. We could call 10 people from a family and sit and discuss and explain what went wrong, but in this situation we're restricted to only one family member that can be in the room to discuss about what went wrong with their disease. I think to highlight my point here is the fact that I had a very young patient of a 19-year-old who just came in with just a 1-week history of fever, cough, and she had a bit of difficulty in breathing. And she came in, and 3 days later, she actually died. And I had to break the bad news to the family members, in which there had to be only one of them. And I was in full because obviously there's risk of exposure. It's family, it's close contact, it's contact tracing, and all of that. So I think in terms of empathy, it's very different. I think, like I said, it pushes us out of our comfort zone. It's not the way things are done before. But I think that's from my perspective. But from teachers, I think they have to come up with different forms of ways to impart knowledge to their students. I have nieces and nephews who've got classes being done over Zoom, and it's really interesting to watch them sitting behind a screen and reading out stuff. I think it's just a new norm to a certain extent. It's really sad though. It's all to be done behind a screen now. But on the bright side, look at all of this. We're all in different parts of the world, but yet we can do this at the comforts of our home. So like I said, there's the good and the bad. It's just the way you look at it, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sergio, should we close the session looking at the interests of time?
Yeah, it's only 2 minutes left. So maybe now comes the moment where we have to thank everyone again for this great day.
Yeah, why don't you do the honor?
Yeah. So okay. So then, thank you very much for your very insightful sharings today. I think it was a very good exchange that shed more light on gig economy as well as frontline work, and I guess it also, at least to me and hopefully also to some others, enlightened that there are close connections even between gig work and medical work at the moment due to the pandemic, and hopefully there is also some networking effect out of today's exchange, because it was a cross country, even I think to a certain extent cross-continent exchange, with Professor Lütje joining, even though he's based in China, but coming from Germany. Because I think what has been highlighted today also several times, that we need not only empathy, but also solidarity in this situation of crisis. So I hope this exchange made a little contribution. Your presentations were definitely a great enlightenment. So we hope to keep in touch with you for some follow-up activities, I guess. And yeah, hopefully you can also join tomorrow, where we focus on the youth perspective, and or on Friday, where we have the labor response again, having some exchanges with Brother Hidayat and Brother Dong, who some of you might know. So yeah, hope to see you soon again on this channel or another one, and have a nice evening.